Chapter 35:51. This was a vicious plan that could kill many birds with one stone. Not only were the ancient epics and martial epics competitors in a life-and-death relationship, but the ancient epics and ancient epics were also in a life-and-death relationship. Compared to the powerful Fortune Divine Dynasty that was at the peak of its power, those ancient era's opponents were much easier to deal with. To deal with the martial epics and the Fortune God Dynasty, they had to team up. Many ancient epics had to work together to have a chance of success. It wasn't that there were no successful cases since ancient times, but most of them had failed. That was why, relatively speaking, it was easier to target the other ancient eras. Moreover, if this strategy succeeded, the consequences would be unimaginable. The Fortune God Dynasty had suffered 2 consecutive losses. Even with the Fortune God Dynasty's deep foundation, it wouldn't be able to withstand such repeated losses. They wouldn't be able to retaliate for hundreds of thousands of years, or even millions of years. Once Moon City fell into the hands of the ancient epics for hundreds of thousands of years, or even millions of years, there would be no hope of taking it back. At that time, with Moon City as their base, the ancient epics could endlessly invade the Fortune God Dynasty. At that time, the entire Fortune world wouldn't have any peaceful days. Perhaps there would be endless war in the future. Although the current Fortune God Dynasty was also embroiled in endless war between the Fortune God Dynasty and the Outer Realms, as well as the various races within the Fortune God Dynasty and the Outer Realms, it couldn't be compared to the war that would destroy the ancient epics. Once the war between the ancient epics started, the casualties would be in the hundreds of millions. It was completely different from the small skirmishes within the Fortune world. This was a matter of life and death for all the races. Yi Shiwen's first reaction was to destroy this array formation, but he soon discovered that it was impossible. After this array formation started operating, it couldn't be stopped. Through the mysterious space, Yi Shiwen had gained a considerable understanding of this array formation. He immediately understood that this array formation couldn't be stopped from the start. These demonic epics people were clearly afraid of being stopped midway, so they created this array formation that couldn't be stopped once it was activated. Yi Shiwen saw from afar that there was a mountain of divine materials on the other side of the barrier. Medicinal pills and so on were exuding a fragrant aroma. There weren't any particularly precious medicinal pills and divine materials. However, they were still very rare. Regardless of whether it was the divine materials or the pills, they were all produced in the Fortune world. It was obvious that they had been plundered after Moon City was captured. Because the fall had been too sudden, many things had not been moved. They had all fallen into the hands of the demonic path epic and the various ancient epics. It could be said that the loss of just Moon City was immeasurable. But now all of this had benefited the demonic path epics people. The demonic path epics people had used these precious divine materials and pills to form the foundation of this grand array. This was also the foundation that maintained this grand array. In other words, the terrifying energy that erupted from the formation at the end was formed by extracting the energy from the pills and divine materials. Moreover, the most precious part of it had probably been emptied long ago. The only way to delay the explosion of this formation is to absorb all the energy. However, this method couldn't last long. It could only delay the eruption of the great array. Break for me. With this thought in mind, he no longer hesitated. With a loud roar, a long saber formed from gung metal ancestral chi appeared in his hand. He slashed down fiercely. Although the barrier in front of him was terrifying, it was still broken after a few slashes. The core barrier of this formation was even more terrifying and difficult to deal with than the barrier of Moon City. Yi Shiwen went straight to the other side of the barrier. All kinds of divine materials and elixirs were piled up like a mountain. However, these divine materials and elixirs were also covered with all kinds of barriers and matrix formations. It was extremely complicated. Yi Shiwen could see at a glance that this was a chain of matrix formations. Pulling one part would affect the whole thing. Therefore, he looked directly at the sky. The energy within these divine materials and pills was directly extracted by the great power of the formation and turned into energy. One by one, the divine materials and pills, after their energy was extracted, they all collapsed and turned into nothingness. These were the wealth and heritage of the fortune god dynasty that had accumulated for many years. However, now they were being used to deal with the army of the fortune god dynasty. This in itself was very ridiculous and sad. Endless spiritual power surged from Yi Shiwen's body, and then it turned into a monstrous hand on the spot, directly grabbing the energy. Boom! These surging energy instantly poured into Yi Shiwen's body under the guidance of Yi Shiwen's big hand. Like a vast ocean, it instantly poured into his body. Even with the capacity of a celestial master's body, he could feel that this energy was endless. And this was only a part of the entire formation. In the entire formation, there were a total of 8 light pillars. These light pillars contained endless energy. Under the guidance of the power of rules, they poured into the depths of the formation, constantly accumulating and accumulating until the final explosion. Yi Shiwen diverted some of the energy. Sure enough, he felt that the speed of the entire formation's operation had slowed down a lot. However, this alone was not enough. This energy rushed into Yi Shiwen's body. It was extremely violent, and there was no way to directly absorb it. In other words, with Yi Shiwen's absorption ability, he could not convert it in time. It was much more violent than the most violent and disorderly chaotic energy. This energy was simply extracted and sent into the depths of the Great Formation. Anyway, this Great Formation was going to explode eventually. So, the more violent and disorderly this energy was, the better it would be. However, Yi Shiwen was suffering now. Yi Shiwen only had time to absorb part of it. The rest was wreaking havoc in his body. Even with Yi Shiwen's physical strength, dense golden blood beads began to seep through the surface of his body. These were his internal organs, capillaries, and cells that were torn apart. Although Yi Shiwen was also trying his best to recover, he could not keep up with the speed at which his body was being destroyed. No, if this goes on, even I will explode and die. Yi Shiwen thought. The energy in this formation was used to destroy the entire Fortune God Dynasty's army. One could imagine how terrifying the energy contained in it was. If it were an ordinary heavenly master, even if they were in the same realm as him, they would quickly explode and die. There was no way they could persist. Just as Yi Shiwen was about to withdraw his hand, he suddenly thought of another matter. Although this energy was disorderly, it was not violent to that extent. He had no way to absorb it and convert it into cultivation power. However, this did not mean that there was no way to use it. At this time, he calmed down, and a surge of energy began to surge out his body. It was none other than the Qi of Merit. Originally, he wanted to cultivate the body of merit. In addition to a lot of time, the most important thing was that he needed an endless amount of energy to finally cultivate the body of merit. That itself would consume a huge amount of wealth. Originally, Yi Shiwen was also very worried about where to get such a huge amount of wealth. He was afraid that he would have to find a way to plunder the wealth of some ancient era to complete the last step. But now, there was no need for that. This was the opportunity that was right in front of him. Although it was very dangerous now, he decided to take the risk because he did not see Scarlet Lien Demon Ancestor following him for a long time. Obviously, Scarlet Lien Demon Ancestor thought that Yi Shiwen was trapped inside. With the strength of an ordinary heavenly master, it was impossible to break this boundary. Indeed, they would be trapped inside. However, Scarlet Lien Demon Ancestor did not know that Yi Shiwen had an incomparably sharp divine object like the 7th Metal Ancestral Qi and a powerful trump card like the Supreme Ancestral Symbol. To others, this was a prison that would trap them for life. But to Yi Shiwen, it was not that scary. He was very sure that Scarlet Lien Demon Ancestor did not know the situation inside. In that case, he would give it a try. Once he cultivated the body of merit, Scarlet Lien Demon Ancestor would not be able to easily injure him. Even if he faced Scarlet Lien Demon Ancestor, he might be able to escape unscathed. Thinking of this, Yi Shiwen no longer hesitated. He pinched a hand sign and chanted an incantation in accordance with the ancient technique. The chi of virtue hidden in the entire inner world instantly boiled and transformed into a terrifying torrent that submerged his entire body. However, this chi of virtue was the purest and kindest energy in the world, so it wouldn't hurt Yi Shiwen even if it blotted out the sky and covered the earth. It would only offset the damage caused by this energy and constantly repair his body. The energy of this great formation bombarded down, constantly tearing the cells of Yi Shiwen's body. However, the chi of merit immediately repaired this injury. Moreover, it began to gradually absorb it and integrate it into Yi Shiwen's body. If outsiders saw Yi Shiwen doing this, they might really be shocked. He actually used the most violent and disorderly energy of this great formation to cultivate the golden body of merit. Yi Shiwen had the foundation of the gilded tyrant form. Moreover, he had integrated the gung metal ancestral chi. If there were any areas that might have been disharmonious or hidden dangers, they had now completely disappeared after the baptism of the chi of merit. Yi Shiwen would cultivate the most terrifying and powerful gilded tyrant form. This was a terrifying body that could destroy a supreme Taoist tool. It was truly enough to compete with a top-notch supreme Taoist tool. Little by little, Yi Shiwen's body was permeated with a kind of sacred and peaceful golden color. The golden body of merit began to be cultivated bit by bit. From a small part at the beginning, it soon covered his whole body. Originally, it might have taken a considerable number of years to cultivate. However, under the tempering of the violent energy of the great formation, it was completed in a short time. Suddenly, Yi Shiwen opened his eyes, and 2 rays of light shot out from his eyes. His whole body was exuding a dazzling golden radiance. It seemed as if he was cast in gold, and there were mysterious and virtuous talismans flowing on the surface of his body like flowing water. Gilded Tyrant form completed. Chapter 35:52. Yi Shiwen opened his eyes, and a golden light burst out from them. His virtuous golden body had been successfully cultivated. Only then did he realize that even the virtuous golden body was different from the virtuous golden body. Because everyone's path was different, the virtuous body and virtuous golden body would not be the same. What Yi Shiwen cultivated was the tyrant virtuous golden body. It belonged to one of them. It was somewhat similar to the virtuous golden body achieved by the middle heavenly master, but it was also different. However, some basic things were the same, including killing without karma. The so-called karma without karma meant that if no one saw it, then the matter did not exist. Generally speaking, for great magical powers, there was such a saying as deduction. The more powerful the deduction ability, the more things could be deduced. Even if it was done flawlessly, it could actually be concealed from others, but it could not be concealed from the heavens. There were backups in the heavens. Therefore, as long as one was willing to spend the price to calculate, one could always calculate some clues. Some great magical powers could easily calculate hundreds of lives of ordinary mortals. They could even calculate hundreds of lives in the future. Because compared to those with great magical powers, the lives of mortals were constant, and it was not difficult to calculate. However, now that he had cultivated the golden body of merit, the situation was completely different. There was no backup in the heavenly Tao, so no matter how much others paid, they could not calculate any clues. In addition, because of the virtuous chi, some spiritual attacks were simply ineffective. The only way was to break through it by force. It was a nightmare for those powerful spiritual cultivators, and physical cultivation was one of Yi Shiwen's strong points. Moreover, in the future, the coercion of those powerful masters, such as the Moon City Lord, Demon Lord, and so on, had no effect on him. Although it was only coercion, it was also a very important part for a powerhouse. These were just some of the basic benefits of the virtuous golden body. Yi Shiwen's gilded body of tyrant physique had many other formidable aspects. Generally speaking, it was an enhanced and upgraded version of his original gilded body of tyrant physique. It was strong enough to compete with a supreme Tao tool. In fact, it was strong enough to blow it up. He could display the might of a supreme Tao tool with his bare hands. Moreover, the the amount of power his body could contain was even greater. It would be even more difficult for him to cultivate a realm to the Great Circle. However, once he completed his cultivation, he would not be a match for anyone in the same realm. Yishuan was sure that he could beat the two of them if he could reach the realm of the Moon City's City Lord, Red Serpent Demon Lord, and the others one day. He wouldn't be afraid even if he encountered outstanding experts like Raha Demon Lord or Middle Heavenly Lord. Now, the most practical benefit was that even an 8th realm super heavenly venerable would find it difficult to hurt him. It could be said that he had nothing to fear as long as he didn't bump into a formidable existence like the Scarlet Serpent Demon Elder. In fact, he could still retreat unscathed even if he bumped into one. If he had successfully cultivated the Gilded Tyrant body of virtuous virtue, then even if he wasn't a match for Scarlet Serpent Archdevil, he would still be able to kill his way out and escape unscathed. This was the tyranny of the Gilded Tyrant body of virtuous virtue. However, it wasn't too late to cultivate the Gilded Tyrant body of virtuous virtue now. Yishuan looked around again. The Great Array was still operating, but the operating speed of the area he was in was obviously not as fast as the other areas. Almost half of the resources in this part of the Great Array had been seized by Yishuan. There was no way to keep up with the development of the other parts. At this time, he could feel that the energy in the entire Great Array was gradually increasing. At this time, it had been a full 3 days and 3 nights since he achieved the Gilded Tyrant body of virtuous virtue. It only took him 3 days to achieve the Gilded Tyrant body of virtuous virtue, and it was all thanks to the energy that supported the operation of the Great Array. Yishuan roughly estimated that it was far more than 20 king-level dragon veins. It wouldn't be easy for him to gather all this wealth by himself. Even if he obtained 20 king-level dragon veins, it would still take him hundreds of years to refine them before he could achieve the Gilded Tyrant body of virtuous virtue. But now, in the process of desperately refining that energy, he had already succeeded. It could be said that misfortune and blessings were interdependent. At this time, the energy gathered in the center of the Great Array had reached the point where Yishuan's expression changed. If he continued to stay here and waited for the Great Array to explode, he would be dead. Even if he had cultivated the Gilded Tyrant body of virtuous virtue, he would still be killed in an instant. Not to mention him, even experts like the Moon City Lord, Middle Heavenly Master, and Red Serpent Demon Elder would also die if they were hit at such a close distance. There was no way they could escape. Yishuan immediately decided to leave. Now that he thought about it, he was simply too daring. If this Great Array exploded before Yishuan completed his cultivation, he wouldn't even know how he died. As the saying goes, seeking riches comes with risks. However, Yishuan was actually quite confident. Since the Demon Era wanted to capture the entire Fortune God Dynasty's army in one fell swoop, it was impossible to detonate this Great Array in a short period of time. If the Great Array exploded now, then all previous efforts would be wasted. It would be difficult to use such a method a second time. Of course, he had to do it once and for all. Therefore, Yishuan guessed that the Great Array would explode when the Fortune God Dynasty's emperors attacked Moon City, catching them off guard. However, judging from the current situation of the Grand Formation, even if the Grand Formation was operating, it wouldn't be able to hold on for long. The suppressive power of the Grand Formation was getting more and more violent and powerful. At this rate, it wouldn't be long before the Grand Formation exploded. In order to maximize the effect of this explosion, the Demon Era would definitely think of a way to let the Fortune God Dynasty's army in. The best way was to defeat them. In fact, even if the Demon Era didn't take the initiative to go easy on them, based on Yishuan's observations and the strength of the various ancient eras in Moon City, it was only a matter of time before they fell. And if the Demon Era went easy on them, it would definitely speed up the process. Therefore, there wasn't much time left for Yishuan because he still had to inform the Middle Heavenly Master and the others to evacuate. If the Fortune God Dynasty's army suffered heavy losses, then there wouldn't be any benefits for him. Thinking of this, Yishuan let out a long roar, and golden light filled the sky. A long saber materialized in his hand, and a huge hole was blasted open in the protective barrier. However, the instant this hole was formed, it gradually shrank. The Great Array's self-defense mechanism had activated. Taking advantage of this hole, Yishiwen took a step forward and instantly disappeared into the hole. When Yishiwen reappeared in Moon City, he discovered that the stalemate situation had begun to turn in the Fortune God Dynasty's favor. Most of the city walls had fallen, and most of the barriers and array formations hadn't been activated. Originally, Yishiwen thought that it might be because the Fortune God Dynasty hadn't occupied Moon City for a long time. So many barriers and array formations hadn't been activated. But now, it seemed that this wasn't the only reason. The Demon Era had probably done this on purpose. Since they couldn't protect the city anyway, it wouldn't matter whether they activated it or not. In the end, it would be the same, so why waste time? And now, as the Fortune God Dynasty gradually occupied the city walls, their advantage was becoming more and more obvious. The Fortune God Dynasty's military strength was several times that of these ancient eras. At this time, their advantage in numbers was displayed vividly. These ancient eras were forced to retreat step by step. They weren't a match for the Fortune God Dynasty at all. If Yishiwen had been happy to see this scene in the beginning, then he only felt incomparable danger now. The Fortune God Dynasty's army was in greater danger with every step they took. Above Moon City, the Fortune God Heavenly Monarch and the Demon Era's Demon Ancestor were still fighting. Although neither of the two extraordinary powerhouses were present, just the clash of the sovereign Tao treasures left behind by both sides was enough to let people understand how terrifying they were. It was enough to let people experience some of their glory. But to maintain this kind of battle, every minute and second required endless wealth. The Fortune God Dynasty was rich and overbearing, but the Demon Era was also gritting their teeth and holding on. If either side collapsed at this time, the consequences would be unimaginable. But at this time, in Yishiwen's opinion, this was clearly the Demon Era's disguise. Suddenly, Yishiwen saw that the human race army was being beaten back step by step. Soon, they had retreated to the vicinity of the city walls. And in front of them, a powerful heavenly venerate was beating the human race's million-strong army back step by step with a single hand. With a wave of his hand, he could create a terrifying storm that could blow an entire world into pieces. Even with the protective talismans that Yishiwen had prepared for them, the human race army suffered heavy losses under this storm. In front of the human race army were Bian Xiaoya, the human emperor, and the sky-shaking Thunder Emperor. They were currently burning all the power in their bodies to resist the Heavenly Lord. At this moment, they were the only ones who could resist the Heavenly Lord in front of them. But even so, in front of this Heavenly Venerate, they still couldn't fight back. It was just that this Heavenly Venerate didn't use his full strength. It was as if he was toying with them. Even so, they were still being beaten back step by step. They couldn't resist at all. In particular, the sky-shaking Thunder Emperor, who was blocking the front line, felt a kind of despair. He and this Heavenly Venerate were only one realm apart. One was a peak sovereign emperor, while the other was a first realm Heavenly Venerate. But the difference in strength between them was like heaven and earth. It was just a difference of one realm. Facing this Heavenly Venerate was like an ordinary being facing a god. They couldn't fight back at all. At this moment, he felt a deep sense of despair. Chapter 35:53. They were only one step away from each other, but the difference between them was like the difference between heaven and earth. Just one person was enough to force the entire human race army to retreat. This was the reality. In the past, sky-shaking Thunder Emperor only intuitively knew that a celestial master was much stronger than an emperor. However, now that he had a face-to-face confrontation, he could feel how terrifying a celestial master was. The gap between a celestial master and an emperor was like the gap between heaven and earth. It was like the gap between an ordinary creature and an emperor, or even bigger. At this time, he recalled Yishiwen's valiant battle record from before. He had blasted a celestial master into pieces. Everyone had already felt that this battle record was very terrifying, and also felt that it was an incredible miracle. However, only after a real battle with a heavenly master would one understand how big the gap between an emperor and a heavenly master was. It was a miracle that Yi Shiwen was able to succeed. It was simply unimaginable for ordinary people. For a moment, the sky-shaking Thunder Emperor was a little absent-minded. However, it was also at that moment that a huge gap appeared in the formation formed by him, the Human Emperor and Moon Empress Bian Xiaoye. The heavenly master in front of him just sneered and crushed a finger. This finger was composed of countless divine wind talismans. This was an Empyrean from the divine wind era. This was also an ancient era, an opportunity formed by endless storms. The life forms that were born in that era all had the same characteristics: singular, berserk, and terrifying. Boom, puff, puff, puff. After a loud noise, the formation of the three emperors was completely scattered. The sky-shaking Thunder Emperor and the other two emperors were sent flying while vomiting blood. In particular, the sky-shaking Thunder Emperor bore the brunt. His entire body exploded on the spot. He suffered heavy losses. Even behind them, many of the human clan army suffered a disaster and were implicated. Overestimating yourself, the divine wind era's heavenly venerate sneered. Although the entire ancient era's allied army was being beaten back, his side still held the upper hand. This race was really bold. They didn't even have a heavenly venerate, yet they dared to kill their way into Moon City. Wasn't this just courting death? It just so happened that they could all become his meritorious deeds. The reason why he hadn't killed them yet was because he wanted to subdue all of these people and make them his subordinates. These millions of elites were an incredible fortune. The divine wind era was filled with violent hurricanes. For the creatures born in it, it was naturally like fish in water. However, for other creatures, it was simply a dead end. The living beings of each epoch were born in completely different environments, especially the early epochs like the Divine Wind Epoch and the Seventh Gold Epoch. When they were born, the environment they lived in was very simple. The later the epoch was born, the more complex the environment they lived in. Until the Martial Era, different creatures were born in various environments. It could be said that 100 flowers bloomed and bloomed. Everyone knew that the more complex the environment and species, the more diverse and perfect the heavenly Tao became. Hence, those ancient epochs frequently came to the Martial Epoch to capture the Martial Epoch's creatures, bringing them to the ancient epoch to reproduce. On one hand, they could increase the changes of the heavenly Tao, making it even more tyrannical. Furthermore, the descendants of these creatures could be brainwashed and turned into spies, sent into the Martial Epoch as spies. This could be said to be killing many birds with one stone. In his eyes, there was no doubt that this human race army was an extremely good choice. This was especially so for the millions of human race elites. Even the weakest among them was a divine-level expert. These were all existences that were beyond the three realms and did not belong to the five elements. No matter how harsh the environment was, they would still be able to survive. Only these people were worth capturing. The ordinary Martial Epoch's creatures would die no matter how many were captured. There was no point in capturing them. Everyone showed the will to die. After being beaten up to this point, they naturally understood that they were dead for sure. They had long known how terrifying a heavenly master was. However, they had not expected them to be able to completely change the situation. If it were an ordinary sovereign emperor charging into the battle formation of such an elite army, they would immediately be blasted to death. However, a heavenly master would not. This was the difference. As long as you are willing to go to the Divine Wind Epoch with me, I guarantee that I will not kill you. I will even open up a space in the Divine Wind Epoch for you to reproduce. At that time, you will be the ancestors of the Divine Wind Epoch's humans. Why not? The Divine Wind Epoch Heavenly Master said loudly. Tui, don't even think about it. As long as we still have breath, that is absolutely impossible. Bian Xiaoye snorted. Do you think we humans have no heavenly masters? When my master returns, it will be your death. Hearing that Bian Xiaoye was still unwilling to surrender even at this time, A horrifying light flashed in the divine wind epic's heavenly master's eyes. You overestimate yourself. Since you want to die, I will grant your wish. The divine wind epic heavenly master released a terrifying aura. Normally, when such an Empyrean went crazy, the entire Moonlight City would be shaken. But at this time, the entire Moonlight City was caught in the flames of war. Although battles between Empyreans weren't common, there were still many. Thus, his actions didn't seem special at all. But the terrifying pressure that swept through the skies caused the human army to pale. It had to be known that this divine wind epic heavenly master hadn't even used his full strength, and that was already enough to make them feel despair. Now, there was no need to even mention it. There was simply no hope left. My life is over. When many people were saying these words, suddenly, a cold shout came from afar. I think you're the one who's overestimating yourself. This voice came from far away, and in almost an instant, it arrived at the battlefield where the human army and the divine wind epic heavenly master were fighting. Who is it? The divine wind epic heavenly master suddenly felt a strong sense of crisis rushing directly from the soles of his feet to his head, making him almost instinctively want to retreat. But in the next breath, this figure had already arrived in front of him. It was a young man of the human race, and he had the same aura as the army in front of him. They both belonged to the same race. He suddenly remembered that Bien Xiaoya had once mentioned that her master was also an Empyrean of the human race. He immediately understood the identity of this person in front of him. You are this Empyrean of a human race. The divine wind epic heavenly master looked at Yi Shiwen coldly and said, Yes, it is me. Yi Shiwen said coldly, You really overestimate yourself. Who do you think you are to dare to take in my human race army? The Empyrean of the divine wind era could only faintly feel an extremely dangerous feeling coming from Yi Shiwen's body. But when he heard Yi Shiwen say this, his complexion became extremely ugly. Yi Shiwen was completely looking down on him. He simply didn't put him on the same level as him. But almost in an instant, he had already made a decision. Countless flying talismans appeared under his feet, and his figure turned into a gust of wind, instantly disappearing from the battlefield. He had been scared away by Yi Shiwen. Yi Shiwen hadn't made a move yet, but the terrifying aura that Yi Shiwen carried still made him feel a great threat. Under such circumstances, how could he still dare to fight with his life on the line? If Yi Shiwen had invaded the divine wind epic, he might have been able to fight to the death. But at this time, it was not a good idea to fight to the death with Yi Shiwen. How many Empyrean heavenly masters were on the battlefield of Moon City? It was simply incalculable. If he was not careful, he might fail miserably. That was not what he wanted. Phew, Bien Xiaoya and the others breathed a sigh of relief. They felt as if they had walked around the gates of hell. That kind of despair, even now, was still vivid in their minds. It also made them understand the gap between them and Empyrean heavenly masters. However, such a powerful Empyrean heavenly master was actually scared away when facing Yi Shiwen. He didn't even have the guts to make a move. This also made them deeply aware of how powerful Yi Shiwen was today. Master, Bien Xiaoya was just about to speak, feeling extremely happy. Suddenly, she saw Yi Shiwen sneer and shout, You want to leave? I think it's too easy for you. Since you're here, then stay. Yi Shiwen said. As soon as his voice fell, his big hand suddenly grabbed out. It grew bigger and bigger. It expanded against the wind and emitted golden light that filled the sky. It directly tore a huge crack in the space above the Moon City. It should be known that the space of Moon City was extremely sturdy. Even Empyrean heavenly masters would find it difficult to destroy it, let alone such a casual grab. He didn't even use much spiritual power. He simply used his own physical body to tear it apart. How terrifying was this? The power of Yi Shiwen's virtuous tyrant form golden body was really terrifying. And in the crack, the figure of the heavenly master of the divine wind era who had just escaped emerged. When he escaped into the subspace, he was unexpectedly caught by Yi Shiwen. Yi Shiwen could easily distinguish them in the boundless subspaces that filled the sky. The Empyrean from the Divine Wind era suddenly felt that the dimensional space he was in was actually being torn apart. He was scared half to death. He had never thought that he would actually be caught after running so far away. Then, Yi Shiwen's big hand grabbed him like a fierce tiger coming down the mountain. The Divine Wind era Heavenly Master roared, "I'll fight it out with you." He used all his strength, and all the spiritual power in his body was burning. It turned into a terrifying attack and grabbed towards Yi Shiwen's big hand. However, after leaving a shallow mark on the big hand, it collapsed. He was also caught by Yi Shiwen's hand and crushed into pieces. Chapter 35-54. The Heavenly Master from the Divine Wind era only had time to scream before he was killed on the spot. He was crushed to death with just a simple pinch. Yi Shiwen's expression was indifferent, as if he had crushed an ant to death. This was not a difficult thing for him at all. This Heavenly Master from the Divine Wind era was indeed very powerful to Bian Xiaoya, the Human Emperor and the Thunder Emperor. He was like an undefeatable heavenly law. But to Yi Shiwen, he was just a first realm Heavenly Master. Although he had entered the Heavenly Master realm for a long time, he was not even comparable to Yi Shiwen when he had just entered the Heavenly Master realm, let alone now. They were simply not on the same level. The current Yi Shiwen was too strong. After entering the high-level Heavenly Master realm, he was in a different world from these low-level Heavenly Masters. At this time, he already understood why the Fortune God dynasty could suppress all the powerful clans and super sects in the north, south, east, and west major domains with just a few great Heavenly Masters. Even the super clans of the foreign domains could only be steadily suppressed, because the strength of a top expert was not something that ordinary people could imagine. They were all Heavenly Masters, but there was a huge difference in strength. Now, Yi Shiwen also had such crushing strength. Seeing this scene, whether it was the Thunder Emperor who was about to speak or the Thunder Emperor who was recovering, all of them were dumbfounded. They simply could not believe the scene in front of them. It was simply a joke. The powerful Heavenly Master of the Divine Wind era, who had beaten them like stray dogs, was crushed like an ant in front of Yi Shiwen. This had completely subverted their understanding. Their understanding of Heavenly Masters was very vague. They only felt that all Heavenly Masters, even the weakest one, were very tyrannical to them. As for how Heavenly Masters were divided, they only knew that they were divided into 9 realms. However, they knew very little about the difference in strength between each realm. Therefore, their understanding of Yi Shiwen was only that he was very strong. They did not expect him to be so strong that he could almost sweep and crush everyone with his own strength. Moreover, compared to 3 days ago, the feeling he gave them was even stronger. Some people obtain 100 points because of their strength, while others obtain 100 points because the full score was only 100 points. This could be used to describe Yi Shiwen's current situation. After beheading this Heavenly Lord of the Divine Wind era, Yi Shiwen smoothly watered his body onto the World Tree. Yi Shiwen's attacks had become much easier after he had practiced the golden body of the virtuous tyrant form. He wouldn't have been this terrifying if he hadn't practiced the golden body of the virtuous tyrant form 3 days ago. It could be said that Yi Shiwen was not inferior to a peak 7th realm Heavenly Venerable. Powerful was the only adjective. The fruit of the world on the world tree was becoming more and more beautiful in his inner world. It could mature at any time, and his strength would soar once it matured. "Master," Bian Xiaoya looked at Yi Shiwen and said excitedly. Yi Shiwen possessed such strength, and he was the most excited one. And Yi Shiwen slightly nodded and said with a smile, "I came late, but you all performed very well." You didn't bow and scrape to him. The spine of the human race must be straight, and it depends on you all. You must kneel to the end and never bend your waist. "Master, you flatter us." Bian Xiaoya smiled slightly and touched the back of her head. She seemed to be a little embarrassed. She could only show such a girlish attitude in front of Yi Shiwen. "All right, I will give you treatment. You all leave immediately. Leave this place as far as possible," Yi Shiwen said. Then he waved his hand. Suddenly, countless golden lights burst out from his fingers and turned into phoenixes that filled the sky. These phoenixes flew into the bodies of every injured elite of the human race. This included the sky-shaking Thunder Emperor. He had almost recovered in an instant. Your Honor, what exactly happened? The human emperor was the first to realize that something bad might have happened. Otherwise, Yishuan wouldn't have said so. One must know that Yishuan had told them to move forward bravely, to fight bravely, and to make great contributions to the Fortune God dynasty. When the time came, there would be many benefits for them. How long had it been? Yet, his attitude had completely changed. The demon era buried a self-detonation array in this city. Once it explodes, everyone nearby will die. Even heavenly masters can't protect themselves, let alone you all. Yishuan didn't hide it from them and said directly. Hearing Yishuan's words, everyone's faces turned pale. The human clan army also shivered. They could imagine how terrible it was. If the demon era succeeded, they would really be dead. Even heavenly masters couldn't resist that kind of power, let alone them. They were basically dead. All right, the most important thing is to leave this place as soon as possible, Yishuan said and waved his hand. Everyone felt their vision go black. When they could see again, they found themselves in the camp of the Fortune God dynasty's army. They had escaped. It was Yishuan who had personally sent them away. In order to avoid any undue delay, Yishuan had personally taken action. He couldn't use such a method in Moon City because time and space in Moon City were divided into pieces by the enchantments and formations. However, there were no such obstacles outside the Moon City. Yishuan had already escaped in just a moment. All of you wait here for news. Don't wander around. After Yishuan warned them, he flew out and instantly flew into the Middle Heavenly Venerate army. At this time, the Middle Heavenly Venerate was still controlling the Fortune Universe Scroll to resist the Heaven-Splitting Demon Axe. More accurately, he was restraining the Heaven-Splitting Demon Axe to prevent it from posing a fatal threat to the Fortune God Dynasty's army. Beside him were the Western and Northern Heavenly Venerates, who were assisting him in controlling the Fortune Universe Scroll. Otherwise, it would be too strenuous for the Middle Heavenly Venerate alone. Yishuan could clearly see that the essence and energy of countless divine materials had been extracted and transformed into a torrent of energy that poured into the universe map of good fortune. A massive amount of resources and wealth would be consumed every second if one wanted to activate the universe map of good fortune. Wuzun, why are you here? The Middle Heavenly Venerate immediately noticed Yishuan's appearance and felt a little strange. Shouldn't Yishuan be taking advantage of the situation to attack Moon City? At this time, everyone who was interested in competing for the position of Eastern Heavenly Venerate was fighting on the front lines. Even Spacetime Heavenly Venerate was fighting on the front lines. He wanted to make great contributions and finally seize the position of Eastern Heavenly Venerate. Therefore, Yishuan felt very strange at this time. This is bad, Yishuan said. The demon era buried a self-detonation array in Moon City. This time, the Battle of Moon City is simply a trap set by the demon era. They want to catch us and those ancient eras in one fell swoop. When our army attacks the depths of Moon City, this self-detonation array will explode. At that time, whether it is our army or the ancient era's coalition army, we will all die. No one will survive. Hearing Yishuan's words, the Middle Heavenly Venerable suddenly felt cold sweat, and his back was cold. If what Yishuan said was true, then there was a huge trap waiting for them to jump into this time's Moon City battle. If the Devil Path era's people were allowed to have their way, then the Fortune God Dynasty's army's losses would be much greater than the 10 Divine Cities' combined army. At that time, the entire foundation of the Fortune God Dynasty's rule would be shaken. The consequences would be unimaginable. Even a moment of carelessness could lead to the crisis of annihilation. Since the demon era dared to use this array, the power of this array was needless to say. If Yishuan had seen an ordinary array, he would have been destroyed. He wouldn't have dared to rush over. Now that they thought about it, there were indeed many unreasonable points. For example, the defense in Moon City was much lower than they had expected, and the resistance wasn't as strong. Originally, they thought that the Ancient Era's coalition army was at loggerheads and couldn't work together. But now that they thought about it, it was obviously not the case. It was clearly a huge trap. Looking at the Moon City again, it was like a bloody mouth waiting to swallow the Fortune God dynasty's army whole. And now, it wasn't just the Middle Heavenly Venerate who was sweating profusely. Even the Western and Northern Heavenly Venerates were sweating profusely. One had to know that the main force of the Fortune God dynasty's coalition army, this time, was the trusted subordinates of these great Heavenly Venerates. If Yishuan was right, then they would most likely be annihilated. At that time, no matter how tyrannical they were, without these trusted subordinates, their entire rule would collapse. It was tantamount to tens of thousands of years of hard work collapsing in a single night. Is it possible to destroy or interrupt this array? The Middle Heavenly Venerate immediately recovered and asked. As expected of the Middle Heavenly Venerate of the Fortune God dynasty, he almost immediately asked the core and key point. It's impossible. I have tried. If it is forcibly broken, it will immediately cause the entire array to explode. Those people from the Demon Era are also guarding against this move. Yishuan shook his head and said with a bitter smile, if it could be interrupted or destroyed, he would have done it long ago. Why would he wait until now? Immediately send a message to all the major legions and ask them to return immediately. Don't delay a moment. The Middle Heavenly Venerate said hurriedly. Since they already knew the Demon Era's plan, they couldn't continue. Chapter 35:55. Whether it was the Middle Heavenly Venerate, Western Heavenly Venerate, or Northern Heavenly Venerate, none of them had thought that things would reach this point. They had thought that victory was already in their grasp, but in fact, there was such a huge loophole. Thinking of the Demon Era's actions, even these powerful figures who had stood at the peak of countless eras couldn't help but feel a chill down their spines. The demonic epic actually wanted to catch them all in one fell swoop. In order to do this, they even included the armies of the ancient epics. In terms of viciousness, the demonic epic was second to none. This was also why, out of so many ancient eras, only the demonic Tao era posed the greatest threat to them. In order to win, they would do anything. It was no longer something that could be explained by having a firm mind. If they succeeded, the consequences would be unimaginable. At this time, on the battlefield, Space-Time Heavenly Venerate repeatedly attacked, beating an ancient era's Heavenly Venerate into retreat. He was simply not his opponent. Under his command was the most elite army he had ever led. This time, after the Middle Heavenly Venerate succeeded, the Eastern Heavenly Venerate's position was empty. This was an ironclad fact. He was also very interested in the Eastern Heavenly Venerate's position. Although he was slightly inferior to the Middle Heavenly Venerate, he was still one of the most respected people in the entire Fortune God dynasty. Although he had previously ruled over the Central region, he didn't have any status. Once the Middle Heavenly Venerate ascended, he would have to give up his position. However, if he became the Eastern Heavenly Venerate, he wouldn't be easily shaken. In his opinion, the Eastern Heavenly Venerate's position was a done deal. He couldn't run away from it. However, he also knew that whether it was the original Eastern Heavenly Venerate, Southern Heavenly Venerate, Western Heavenly Venerate, or Northern Heavenly Venerate, they all had their own candidates. There were even some old monsters who would come forward to compete for the position. Although he wasn't afraid, he also wanted to make some contributions to the Fortune God dynasty so that those people would have nothing to say. As for Yishuan, although he was also a candidate for the Eastern Heavenly Venerate's position, he wasn't much to the Eastern Heavenly Venerate. He was just a junior. Who knew how long it would take for Yishuan to reach his level, let alone compete with him? In his opinion, he was far from being a threat. As for escaping from the hands of Moon City's City Lord, that was just escaping. In reality, he was still far from being a threat. Under his all-out attack, the Fortune Divine Dynasty's army pushed the Ancient Era's army back again and again. In just a few days, the ancient Era's army had conquered the city walls. Without the protection of the city walls barrier and array formations, the Fortune Divine Dynasty's army's superiority in military strength was fully displayed. The great army of the ancient era wasn't his match at all. This was especially the case with his path. He was simply unstoppable, sweeping through all directions. The other group, which was very fast, was personally led by Heavenly Venerate Nan. As the ruler of the southern region, Heavenly Venerate Nan's army was naturally very powerful. It was much more tyrannical than space-time Heavenly Venerate's army. The two armies led by the two of them were like two huge pincers that clamped down on Moon City from the east and west. The east and west sides of Moon City were quickly breached. Both of them were competing with each other, each wanting to contribute greatly to the Fortune Divine Dynasty. In order to compete for the position of Eastern Heavenly Venerate, Spacetime Heavenly Venerate had also sent out his elites. From afar, Spacetime Heavenly Venerate could see a soaring army on the other side of Moon City. A figure was charging at the forefront, and all the great army of the ancient era that encountered him collapsed. Even Heavenly Venerates had no way to compete with him. Supreme Venerate Feng Hua. This was a terrifying existence that had cultivated the two completely different wind and fire nomological laws to the peak. He was also the #1 general under Heavenly Venerate Nan. Heavenly Venerate Nan's position wasn't lower than Eastern Heavenly Venerates, so there was naturally no need for him to compete for the position of Eastern Heavenly Venerate. However, if he could place his own people in the position of Eastern Heavenly Venerate, it would be equivalent to having an ally and an assistant in the meeting of the great Heavenly Venerates. The situation would be completely different then. Just like how Middle Heavenly Venerate also wanted Yi Shiwen and Silver Moon to become Eastern Heavenly Venerate. This Supreme Venerate Feng, who would also become an important obstacle on his path to becoming Eastern Heavenly Venerate. Now, Southern Heavenly Venerate had personally led a team for no other reason than to help Supreme Venerate Feng earn merit points. Although it was somewhat despicable, there was really no other way. It was just that Spacetime Heavenly Venerate didn't have such a backer. Otherwise, wouldn't it be great if he had such a backer to help him earn merit points? Although he was proud and aloof, he wasn't stubborn and conservative. Naturally, he knew what was most important sometimes. Just as he was about to make another move and kill an ancient era Heavenly Venerate, he suddenly received a message from Middle Heavenly Venerate. When he completely read the message sent by Middle Heavenly Venerate, he suddenly felt a chill run down his back. If what Middle Heavenly Venerate said was true, then the consequences would be simply unimaginable. However, how could a Middle Heavenly Venerate joke about such a thing? If this was true, then the consequences would be unimaginable. Quick retreat. At that moment, Spacetime Heavenly Venerate reacted almost immediately and transmitted the order to everyone's mind. Everyone in his army was confused. They weren't like Spacetime Heavenly Venerate, who had received a complete message. They had only received an order to retreat. However, as elites, their reaction speed was still very fast. Although they didn't understand why their superiors would issue such an order, they still quickly moved according to the order. However, it wasn't that simple for so many troops to move and change directions. Thus, Spacetime Heavenly Venerate directly made a move and continuously used space and time nomological laws to transfer a portion of the army away. However, there were too many of them. Even with Spacetime Heavenly Venerate's strength, he couldn't transfer this entire army away in a short time. On the other side, the army under Southern Heavenly Venerate, who was also very deep in the Moon City, also received the news. After receiving this news, they also felt cold sweat dripping down their backs. Like Spacetime Heavenly Venerate, their army had gone deep into Moon City. They had originally wanted to compete with Spacetime Heavenly Venerate for the greatest credit in reclaiming Moon City. However, this had now become a path to death. The deeper they went, the closer they got to the massive self-detonation array formation that Middle Heavenly Venerate had mentioned. Southern Heavenly Venerate immediately opened his Dharma eyes. Although his vision was blocked by layers of array formations and boundaries, he could still see an array formation forming in the city. Although he couldn't see it clearly, he instinctively felt an extreme sense of danger. This feeling made him feel as though he was being targeted by a ferocious beast. He immediately understood that Middle Heavenly Venerate wasn't lying. This dangerous situation was even scarier than what Middle Heavenly Venerate had said. He immediately ordered his troops to retreat. This elite army also turned around in an instant. However, it was impossible for them to change directions in a short time. Thus, Southern Heavenly Venerate had no choice but to personally help with the evacuation. Besides these two big shots, the rest of the Fortune Divine Dynasty's army also received the news and began to retreat. Those with Heavenly Venerates helped the army retreat almost immediately. Even those without Heavenly Venerates also retreated immediately. Troops without Heavenly Venerates wouldn't be able to kill their way deep into the city in the next few days. Therefore, it was relatively easy to turn around at this time. The Fortune Divine Dynasty's army retreated even though they had the upper hand. This caused many Ancient Era's elite experts to be puzzled. In their opinion, the Fortune Divine Dynasty's army clearly had the upper hand. At this rate, they could only delay the Fortune Divine Dynasty's army's advance. All of this was within their expectations. The difference in strength between them and the Fortune Divine Dynasty was too great. If it weren't for the heaven-splitting Devil Axe, they wouldn't have the confidence to contend against the Fortune Divine Dynasty. Now that the heaven-splitting Devil Axe was pinned down by the Fortune Universe map, the Fortune God Dynasty's true strength was on full display. They simply didn't have the strength to contend against the Fortune God Dynasty. In their opinion, the situation was a complete collapse, and it was only a matter of time before they escaped from the city's transmission array. However, they weren't willing to give up the Moon City that they had painstakingly conquered with both hands. Although they had obtained a lot of benefits from conquering Moon City, who didn't want to reap more benefits? No one wanted to give up just like that. However, the reason for the Fortune Divine Dynasty's retreat was also a hot topic among them. Could it be that the other reinforcements that hired the pilots had arrived? Or could it be that the Fortune Divine Dynasty's internal strife had broken out and they couldn't even fend for themselves? Many reasons popped up at once, and these guesses seem to be quite reasonable. But in any case, without sufficient information and intelligence, they could only speculate. For them, regardless of the reason, the Fortune Divine Dynasty's retreat was beneficial to them. At the very least, they could hold on for a period of time. As for other things, they didn't think too much about it. In fact, they didn't even know that there was an array formation hidden in the city that could take their lives. They would either die on the battlefield with the Fortune Divine Dynasty or die under this array formation. There were no other possibilities. Compared to the ignorant Ancient Era's experts, the Devil Path Era's higher echelons' faces darkened. They knew what was hidden in this array. It wasn't easy for them to lure the Fortune Divine Dynasty to this place, but now the Fortune Divine Dynasty was retreating. Immediately, some sensitive people guessed that the Fortune Divine Dynasty might have discovered something. Not good. Those people might have discovered it. The plan has been brought forward. Chapter 35:56. The Devil Dao Era's people weren't fools. Since the Fortune God Dynasty had gained the upper hand, it was obvious that they had discovered something amiss. It was even more unlikely that the reinforcements came from other places. If the reinforcements came from other places, they only needed to send layers of resistance to delay the reinforcements, and then they could capture Moon City in one fell swoop. Therefore, whether it was the Ancient Era's reinforcements or the Fortune God Dynasty's internal strife, they couldn't allow the Fortune God Dynasty's army to retreat. Instead, they should try their best to capture the city in one fell swoop. After all, they had already captured the city, and success was only a matter of time. Whether it was the arrival of reinforcements or the Fortune God Dynasty's internal strife, none of these things could be resolved in a short time. Instead, they were more important than capturing Moon City. In that case, there was only one possibility. The grand array in the city had been discovered. Otherwise, The Fortune God dynasty would have no reason to give up after paying such a huge price. Damn it, we were still discovered. Activate at full power. Archdevil Ancestor Luhu, who was controlling the heavens-splitting devil axe, immediately reacted. The Middle Heavenly Venerables already knew about the Grand Array. Although it wasn't the best result to launch an attack now, they couldn't care less about it. If they didn't launch an attack now and watched as the Fortune God dynasty's army retreated, their losses would outweigh their gains. There was no way to stop the Grand Array. It could only accelerate its explosion. Therefore, the Grand Array would definitely explode. It was just a matter of when it would explode. When it could no longer be controlled, the power would be at its most terrifying, enough to destroy the entire Fortune God dynasty's army. But obviously, they couldn't wait for that time. While the Fortune God dynasty's army retreated, the Devil Dao Era's army also received the notice and began to retreat. As for the ignorant Ancient Era's army, no one cared about them. It was obvious that the Devil Dao Era planned to trick them, and to the Fortune God dynasty, the more the Ancient Era's army was weakened, the better. Both sides had a tacit understanding not to inform the Ancient Era's army, and both sides began to race against time to retreat. All of this was because the demonic path epic was faster. They didn't have many people left to guard the city, and most of them were elites. They were already prepared and moved faster. They quickly gathered and headed out of the city. As for the transmission array, it had already been destroyed by them. They couldn't use the transmission array themselves. Otherwise, it would alert the Ancient Era's army. Soon, the demonic epic's army retreated to Demon Venerate Laho's surroundings. Release. As the order was given, the Scarlet Serpent Demon Venerate formed a hand seal. In an instant, the energy contained in the formation in the city shattered, and the talismans that were suppressing it disappeared. Boundless energy spread out to form a terrifying cyclone that exploded. Boom! A huge mushroom cloud rose from the center of Moon City. Violent energy swept out in all directions in an instant. From afar, one could feel the entire primal chaos trembling. Countless Ancient Era's army were dumbfounded. They didn't expect that the attack would come from inside the city. Moreover, the speed at which the energy swept out was too fast. The elite army didn't even touch it. Just by touching the airwave, they were crushed into a bloody mist by the violent pressure. Not good. The Emperor Lords and Heavenly Venerables reacted even faster. They wanted to escape, but it was too late. In just a breath of time, this frenzy had already swept through the entire Moon City. The Emperor Lords only managed to hold on for a while before they turned into a cloud of blood mist in the huge explosion that swept over. They exploded in the air and instantly evaporated. The Heavenly Venerates were slightly stronger. They controlled the laws and could modify the laws. They tried to modify the laws and hide in the dimensional space to avoid this crazy attack. Even so, they could only hold on for a few breaths. When this energy wave swept out, the entire world collapsed. The endless space shattered, and the unstable dimensional planes hidden in the primal chaos turned to ashes in an instant. Hiding in them and modifying the laws could only slightly resist this power. This was like the great destruction of the world. The world was shattered, and the violent power tore everything apart. The entire primal chaos fell into a calamity that simply couldn't be avoided. Even an Empyrean would be powerless in the face of this apocalyptic energy. They could only resist for a little longer, but the result would be the same. This wave of frenzy swept out in almost an instant. Even the upper echelons of the demonic epic's elite army, who had been prepared for this, were shocked when they saw this scene. Their expressions changed, especially when they saw the usually high and mighty extreme grade experts. But now they were like cabbages being destroyed in batches. This was an extremely shocking and terrifying feeling. The entire primal chaos was trembling. The heavens were collapsing and the earth was splitting apart. There was nothing more terrifying than this. These elites of the demonic epic were at least deity-level experts. They were used to seeing life and death. Which one of them hadn't crawled out of a mountain of corpses and a sea of blood? This was especially true in a special epic like the demonic epic. They had killed people like flies. None of them could reach this level without taking the lives of millions. However, they still trembled at this moment. In front of this majestic power, they were nothing. The reason why their hearts were like boulders that couldn't be penetrated by even a drop of water. They were indifferent to life and death. Their minds were like knives, and all living things were like grass. They could kill as many as they wanted. That was because they themselves were at the peak. But if they became grass, there were very few people who could maintain their indifference. People with such an indomitable state of mind would have limitless achievements. Go! Demon Venerable Luoho roared. The heaven-splitting demonic axe hanging above his head burst with a sharp light. It actually split open a huge crack in the primal chaos. Then, countless elites of the demonic epic jumped in. A barrier hung down from the heaven-splitting demonic axe, protecting the demonic epic's army. But even so, about 1/10 of the demonic epic's army couldn't dodge in time, even though they were protected by the heaven-splitting demonic axe. They were swept clean by the energy tide that swept over. Demon Venerable Luoho didn't move in the slightest in the face of all this. Death was a common thing for him. Even if he were to die in the next moment, he might not be moved. He had already reached the step of pursuing the great Tao. Whoosh! In almost an instant, the demonic epic's army disappeared from Moon City. This was the demonic epic's true trump card. If they didn't have the heaven-splitting demonic axe, they wouldn't have chosen to use such a method, because the energy tide that swept out would have killed them all. This energy ultimately proved a truth. In the face of absolute power, the so-called techniques were all a joke. The true great Tao was the cultivation of the Tao, not the techniques. All martial arts had their own limits. Only the great Tao was limitless. After reaching the Emperor realm, the great Tao manifested in front of them. Every move they made was a great fortune. Be it martial techniques or magical powers, they were just a means to release the power of the great Tao. On the path to the great Tao, there were countless evil demons in the heart. Methods to subdue demons were needed. But that was all. As long as one had a few martial techniques, they were enough to run amok. This was also the reason why Yi Shiwen had rarely created any martial techniques ever since he had become an extreme powerhouse. Whether it was a sword technique or a fist technique, it was all the same to him since he had already reached a certain level of strength. There was no difference in essence. Only a few special martial techniques and magical powers could catch his attention. For example, the universe creation palm, which contained the power of heaven and earth, or the virtuous gilded tyrant form, which consolidated the source. Others were nothing in his eyes. Sometimes he used the buried sword secret art to kill the enemy, and sometimes he used the 6 paths of reincarnation fist. For him, it was essentially the same thing. What he created was the great Tao, 3,000 martial arts. He walked a path that no one had ever walked before. Pursuing this supreme martial arts was his fundamental pursuit. Everything else was just a means to help him pursue this supreme martial arts. Therefore, Yi Shiwen had stopped cultivating internal power from a long time ago. Instead, he cultivated the great Tao and comprehended the heavens. In this simple breath, his internal power rose like a tide. No internal power technique was enough to describe his current state. He was in harmony with the heaven and earth. He breathed in and out with the heaven and earth. All rivers flowed into the sea. The sun, moon, and stars were all in his chest. The predecessors were not the master of the world. Only the heavenly Tao was the master of all ages. Not good, they're moving. At this time, the middle heavenly master in the middle of the fortune god dynasty's army suddenly opened his eyes. He also saw the violent energy sweeping across the battlefield. That kind of terrifying power shocked even someone at his level. It wasn't fear, but a feeling of invincibility. The power of this berserk wave was simply too fast, and its destructive power was simply too terrifying. Even if they were prepared for it and ordered the majority of the troops to retreat, it would not be so easy for so many elite troops to retreat, and they were still swept out. Millions of Fortune God Dynasty's elite troops turned into a cloud of blood mist in an instant. Then, they evaporated. There was no difference between them and the ancient armies. Chapter 35:57. This burst of energy was too strong. After being suppressed to the extreme, the terrifying power that erupted from it caused people to involuntarily raise their eyebrows. Tens of millions of the Fortune Divine Dynasty's elite army. What kind of level was that? Only several forces of the top 10 strong forces could take out such a large number of elite troops and masters. They were not ordinary troops or masters, but in an instant, they were turned into ashes. Even though he was prepared for this, the Middle Heavenly Venerate's face still turned ashen when he saw this scene. At his level of cultivation, ordinary things wouldn't be able to affect him. However, he was still enraged. The first thing he did after taking office was to launch a battle to recover the Moon City. But now, the Devil Path era had completely messed things up. What was the use of recovering the Moon City? It was just a pile of ruins, and they had suffered heavy losses. The losses were 10 times worse than what they had expected. Without Yi Shiwen's reminder, it was very likely that they would all be annihilated here. This made him lose all face. Top experts like them seemed to have no desires, but ordinary things couldn't arouse their desires. Even if ordinary people insulted them, they wouldn't care because, in their opinion, it wasn't a slap in the face. No one would show anger towards an ant. The same went for them. Even if an ant insulted them, it wasn't a slap in the face to them. But such a thing was obviously a slap in the face. Rahu Archdevil, I will definitely make you pay the price, the Middle Heavenly Venerate said coldly. Rahu Archdevil had played him ruthlessly, almost causing his entire army to be annihilated. With such deep hatred, it was necessary to get back at him. But experts like them rarely touched life and death. This was because he knew what kind of person Demon Venerate Luoho was. He was different from Moon City's City Lord. In his eyes, they were not on the same level. Even if he used his full strength, he might not be able to kill Demon Venerate Luoho, and vice versa. He could only take revenge and make the demonic epics suffer a great loss. Although it seemed like those who died were the Fortune God Dynasty's elites and had nothing to do with him, he had already become a Middle Empyrean. A Middle Empyrean status was awe-inspiring and lofty, but at the same time, he was also one with the Fortune God Dynasty. The Fortune God Dynasty's fortune was his fortune, and if the Fortune God Dynasty was damaged, then he would be damaged as well. He viewed the Fortune God Dynasty as a stepping stone to the next level, and he would not allow others to destroy it. This was also the reason why the Moon City City Lord was unwilling to betray the Fortune Divine Dynasty, even if he had committed a heinous crime, brought indescribable losses to the Fortune Divine Dynasty, and might even face punishment from the Fortune Divine Dynasty. This was because some things were not easy to obtain. If one gave up, they would be gone forever. This position was a kind of restraint, but it was also a kind of help. Yi Shiwen had to borrow the Eastern Heavenly Venerate's position to help him cultivate. One could imagine how powerful this position was. The power of faith of billions of living beings was in harmony with the heavenly Tao and the people. This was another kind of cultivation path, and it was also the path that the Fortune God Monarch walked. He was different from the great saints like the demon ancestor, who was born at the beginning of the world. He was born to be a divine being, an invincible master who had absorbed the essence of the entire era. There was no difference between the two kinds of Taos. There was no difference between Taos. There was only a difference between people. Therefore, the Devil Tao era led by Demon Venerate Luoho was destroying his Tao. This was a real slap to his face. Therefore, he would return the favor sooner or later because he knew that Demon Venerate Luoho walked the same Tao as him. People like the demon ancestor, who was born to be a great saint, might not appear in an era. However, there was one in the Devil Tao era. Therefore, it was one of the most powerful eras in the ancient era. The martial epic did not. Hence, when the martial epic fought with the ancient epic, the martial epic was in a very passive position. In fact, when the martial epic fought against the ancient epic's creatures, they were at a complete disadvantage, trembling in fear. Later on, the Fortune Heavenly Lord rose up and achieved a supreme great Tao. Only then did the Fortune Divine Dynasty stabilize the world and revive the might of the martial epic, sweeping through the world. The Middle Heavenly Venerate also wanted to be the Fortune God Monarch. Demon Venerate also wanted to be the Fortune God Monarch. It was not just them. Everyone who reached this level wanted to be the Fortune God Monarch. However, it was extremely difficult to achieve. Having such a person in an era was already the essence of heaven and earth. Since ancient times, there had never been such a person in the same era. However, they still wanted to do it. No one was willing to give up. They did not give up. Perseverance was the foundation of their Tao heart. Yishuan was also in the middle of the Great Formation. The entire chaos was trembling. That terrifying light engulfed the entire Moon City in an instant. Ordinary people could only see it for a moment. This terrifying energy tide engulfed everything. The entire Moon City was a microcosm. Such a place was engulfed. It was like seeing a microcosm shattering and collapsing. It was incomparably shocking. Yishuan was also in the middle of the Great Formation. He watched everything in front of him. The entire chaos was trembling. The entire chaos was trembling. Heavenly Venerate experts also said that they could shatter a small world. However, that was not the same concept as destroying a small world. It was not the same thing at all. Seeing this scene, Yishuan's expression changed slightly. He was not afraid. Instead, he understood that he still had a long way to go. The Middle Heavenly Venerate wanted to become the next Fortune God Monarch. He also wanted to reach such a level. Reaching that step would be the true transcendence and achieve immortality. No matter how the world changed, whether it was destroyed or born or destroyed, it would have nothing to do with him. It was like when ordinary creatures became gods and jumped out of the river of fate. From then on, they would no longer be in the 3 realms or the 5 elements. However, gods, emperors, and heavenly venerates were all under the heavenly way. If the heavenly way was destroyed, they would be destroyed along with it. Only the heavenly venerates had the power to protect themselves. However, they still could not transcend. They needed to rely on the power of the heavenly way. Only when one reached the level of the Fortune God Monarch could one truly transcend. Even if the world was destroyed, he would not be destroyed. Therefore, even though he no longer heard of the appearance of such experts, he always believed that those people would not die. Although the Fortune God Monarch had disappeared, he would not die. Not to mention dying all at once. Those were Yishuan's goals. Quick! The Middle Heavenly Venerate waved his hand, and the Fortune of the Universe scroll above his head flew out. It grew bigger and bigger, and in the blink of an eye, it had grown to the size of a world. Then, it swept away the Fortune God Dynasty's army that had yet to withdraw. This was a full 1/3 of the Fortune God Dynasty's army. Previously, the Fortune God Dynasty's army had only withdrawn 1/3 because the Devil Dao era had sensed that something was amiss and had moved ahead of time. Only 1/3 of the Fortune God Dynasty's army could return to the Fortune God Dynasty's main camp. In addition, 1/3 of the Fortune God Dynasty's army had been swept away by the Middle Heavenly Venerate's Fortune of the Universe scroll. It wasn't that he didn't want to sweep away the Fortune God Dynasty's army as soon as possible, but the Fortune God Dynasty's Fortune of the Universe scroll had been busy resisting the heaven-splitting Devil Axe. This was already the limit of a Middle Heavenly Venerate. If it had been the Fortune God Monarch, then forget about sweeping away all these people. He might have been able to suppress the explosion with his own strength. He would be in existence standing at the peak of the era. A full 1/3 of the Fortune God Dynasty's army had been annihilated in the explosion. Among them, there were many Emperor Realm experts. The Heavenly Venerates had survived because they had received the news earlier and were the first to leave. However, this kind of loss was more than enough to hurt a colossus like the Fortune Divine Dynasty. Countless elite soldiers screamed miserably. It was like purgatory on earth. But here, even purgatory could not be formed. These elite soldiers' corporeal bodies and primordial spirits were completely destroyed. Even though they had died tragically, their resentment could not be formed because even their resentment had been wiped out. Along with the annihilation of the ancient era's army, tens of billions of soldiers have been annihilated here. These were the elites among the elites of the various eras. They had died tragically without even fighting. These were the methods of the Devil Tao era, but the truth was as deep as the sea. In a short period of time, tens of billions of elite soldiers had been annihilated, including the 10 great divine cities that had joined forces to attack Moon City, as well as the living beings and soldiers that originally existed in Moon City. They had either been slaughtered or taken away. The number of formidable elites that perished in this battle amounted to an entire army of 20 billion, and there were members from both sides. The scale of this battle couldn't be said to be small, and it was an unprecedentedly grand and magnificent battle. This was the true great battle of this era, and it was also the most horrifying. Compared to such a collision, the internal war of the Fortune God dynasty was really just a small fight. Although the human race's army was more than 1 million, the most elite among them was only about 1 million. This kind of army was already the peak of the human race, but in the epic battlefield, it was ordinary and not very powerful. If they encountered a truly powerful force, they would definitely die tragically. The human race's rise to power was too short. They couldn't even reign supreme in the eastern region, let alone in the epic battlefield. This wasn't a place where a single race could dominate and run amok. It was a clash of all the forces of an epic against another. Rumble, terrifying explosions reverberated endlessly in their ears, and the space they were in trembled violently. The Fortune God dynasty's army that managed to escape with their lives turned deathly pale, feeling as if they had just escaped from the jaws of death. It was impossible for them to escape by themselves. If it weren't for the Good Fortune Universe scroll, they wouldn't have been able to escape. At this time, all the heavenly venerables had flown back and surrounded the middle heavenly venerables. Their faces were extremely ugly. They had been tricked by the Devil Tao era and had almost died. If they hadn't received timely notification, they would have really died this time. In particular, the heavenly venerables that had been annihilated in the violent explosion had ashen faces. They felt like knives were twisting in their hearts. They didn't know how many years of painstaking effort they had put in, but they had been completely annihilated here. Fortunately, they were fine. As the foundation of a great sect and a powerful race, ordinary people couldn't be compared to them. As long as they were still alive, their foundation wouldn't be damaged. This wasn't the worst situation. Chapter 35:58. All the heavenly venerables had ugly expressions on their faces. 1/3 of the Fortune God dynasty's army was swallowed by this energy wave. The entire Moon City was submerged in the energy wave. Even the Fortune God dynasty's allied army's encampment far away from Moon City could feel the entire primal chaos shaking, as if a giant dragon was overturning the seas and rivers, destroying heaven and earth. This kind of terrifying power far surpassed the heavenly venerables. That great array borrowed the power of heaven and earth to erupt. This time, the Fortune God dynasty's allied forces had suffered heavy losses. Fortunately, none of their heavenly venerables had fallen. Excluding those who had fallen during the attack on Moon City, no more heavenly venerables had fallen in the explosion. This was the best news. Although 1/3 of the Fortune God dynasty's elite army had died in the previous battle, it could be said to be more than 1/3 of the Fortune God dynasty's forces. Fortunately, the Fortune God dynasty's strength was not affected. However, these heavenly venerables' expressions were still ugly. The Devil Path era had tricked the Fortune God dynasty twice. The first time, they had taken advantage of the Fortune God dynasty's unguarded state to mobilize the heaven-splitting Devil Axe, catching the 10 divine cities' allied army unprepared. In the end, less than half of the Fortune God dynasty's elite army had managed to escape. No one expected the demonic epic to be so bold. The heaven-splitting demon axe was the epic-suppressing supreme treasure. As long as the heaven-splitting demon axe existed, the demonic epic would be undefeatable. No matter how many ancient epics they offended, even the martial epic, they would remain safe and sound. Without a sovereign Tao artifact of the same grade, it was impossible to resist. The first time, the 10 Divine Cities' allied army strength was comparable to the Fortune God Dynasty's allied army, but the heaven-splitting Devil Axe's sneak attack had caused them heavy losses. It was precisely because of the heaven-splitting Devil Axe's importance that no one had expected the Devil Path era to mobilize the heaven-splitting Devil Axe. If someone attacked the Devil Path era's lair at this time, the Devil Path era might lose its foundation. Of course, the possibility of that happening wasn't high, but it wasn't impossible. Taking risks was the last resort for colossi like the Fortune Divine Dynasty and Devil Path era, because the consequences would be severe if they lost. This forced the Fortune Divine Dynasty to bring out the Fortune Universe Scroll as well. With the Fortune Universe Scroll in the Fortune Divine Dynasty's hands, who would dare to provoke the Fortune Divine Dynasty? The Fortune Divine Dynasty already had the upper hand in terms of strength, and if they were forced into a corner with the Fortune Universe Scroll, it didn't matter how many troops the Fortune Divine Dynasty sent out. This was the reason why the Fortune Divine Dynasty had been as stable as Mount Tai all these years. They had already cheated the Fortune Divine Dynasty once. Who would have thought that they would be cheated again under such circumstances? After being slapped in the face twice in a row, how could the Empyreans remain calm? They were all extremely talented individuals, but now they had become fools that were played around in the palm of someone else's hand. This slap in the face was extremely painful. The demonic epic will make you pay the price. Demon Sovereign Rahu. Among these people, there were even a few demon races' archdevil venerables. Most of what they had learned came from the devil epic's inheritance, but they had merged with the martial epic's inheritance. Naturally, they were standing on the martial epic side, not the devil epic. Moreover, their subordinates had also been cheated and suffered heavy losses. One could imagine the anger in their hearts. Now that the devil epic had detonated the grand formation and left, it could be considered a Pyrrhic victory for the Fortune Divine Dynasty. They had conquered Moon City, but the matter was far from over. Dealing with the aftermath was more troublesome than conquering Moon City. Just the remnant energies in Moon City had to be cleaned up. Otherwise, it would be impossible for living beings to survive. The effort needed was not something that could be completed in a short period of time. From afar, it could be seen that all of Moon City had been razed to the ground, but the world that Moon City was in did not collapse. Many people could not help but feel shocked. That kind of terrifying explosion would have completely collapsed any other small world, but the world that Moon City was in did not collapse. This had been personally built by the Fortune Heavenly Lord. Many laws and methods that other heavenly venerables could not understand had been used. Even though the entire city had been razed to the ground, the small world Moon City was in had not been destroyed. As long as it was rebuilt, it could be used again. The Fortune Divine Dynasty had no experience in this aspect. After all, no divine city of the 10 great divine cities had been conquered before. However, the task of rebuilding afterward was still very arduous. "Everyone, come to the meeting," the middle heavenly venerate said with a cold expression. Then, with a wave of his hand, a space was opened up in the primal chaos, forming a conference hall. The heavenly venerables also entered in a line. Apart from the heavenly venerables, the emperor stayed behind. There were still many things to deal with, so these trivial matters could be handled by the emperors. The heavenly venerables who entered the conference hall did not look good. They had been tricked by the Demon Path era, especially when they had come with the idea of making a great contribution. It had been a resounding slap in the face. They had suffered heavy losses. Everyone has seen what happened today. We were tricked by the Demon Path era, the middle heavenly venerate said coldly. He was not secretive, as they had indeed miscalculated this time. The heavenly venerables were also very silent, especially the ambitious space-time heavenly venerate and southern heavenly venerate. They did not know what to say. However, there is one person who made a great contribution in this matter, the middle heavenly venerate said as he swept his gaze over everyone. Everyone exchanged glances. Only the western heavenly venerate and the northern heavenly venerate roughly knew who the middle heavenly venerate was talking about was. They had been beside the middle heavenly venerate at the time and happened to witness that scene. In fact, they also felt extremely fortunate at this time. If Yi Shiwen's words had made them break out in a cold sweat, then when they saw that big explosion, they already felt extremely fortunate. Moreover, this was because Yi Shiwen had given an early warning. If the explosion had been delayed for a few more days, the power that swept out would not have been this small. The range of the explosion would have directly swept over the Fortune God Dynasty's army camp. If that had happened, the entire army would have been wiped out. Even a few of them might not have been able to escape. Even if they had relied on the good fortune Yuan-Kuan diagram to protect a portion of them, compared to the current result, it could be considered as a complete annihilation. Soon, all the heavenly venerables saw the western heavenly venerate, the northern heavenly venerate, and the middle heavenly venerate looking at Yi Shiwen. However, Yi Shiwen still looked calm and unperturbed. This time, we were able to receive the news and withdraw the army in time to avoid annihilation. This is all thanks to Wu Zun. He was the one who discovered the array formation inside. Without his warning, I'm afraid we would have been wiped out, the middle heavenly venerate said. Everyone suddenly started to go into an uproar. They had not expected that Yi Shiwen would be the first to discover the Devil Path era's conspiracy. If it was as the middle heavenly venerate said, then they would all owe Yi Shiwen a huge favor this time. No matter how much loss they suffered in the Moon City this time, they still owed Yi Shiwen a big favor. This was a huge favor, especially for those who had preserved more of their elites and themselves. This was an even bigger favor. In particular, Space-Time Heavenly Venerate and Southern Heavenly Venerate knew that Yi Shiwen also had thoughts of competing for the position of Eastern Heavenly Venerate. He was also a competitor. Originally, among the many competitors, Yi Shiwen was the weakest in terms of strength and qualifications. It could be said that no one would really treat Yi Shiwen as a competitor. However, it was different now. No one knew how many people wanted to acknowledge this favor. At that time, the issue of qualifications would not be a problem at all. It could be said that there was one more competitor for them. Even they had to be grateful. How could they not be grateful? There were also rules among the Heavenly Venerates. This was a tacit rule among the Heavenly Venerates. Since they had received such a huge favor, they naturally had to return such a favor. Next, it was the fight for the position of Eastern Heavenly Venerate. On this issue, it seemed that everyone was lagging behind Yi Shiwen. Did you really discover the Devil Path era's conspiracy? This time, I owe you a favor. At this time, a Heavenly Venerate directly patted the armrest and said, "Yes, this time we are grateful. If there is anything in the future, we will not hesitate to go through water and tread on fire. There is nothing else to say. This time, I support you for the position of Eastern Heavenly Venerate." After confirming that this matter was not false, the Heavenly Venerates said one after another. Originally, they did think of the possibility of Middle Heavenly Venerate helping Yi Shiwen, but they quickly ruled out this possibility. This was because there was no need for a Middle Heavenly Venerate to say such a lie that could be easily seen through. If such a thing was exposed to be false, it would put him in a more passive position. Even Space-Time Heavenly Venerate would not doubt this. So this time, I intend to record a great merit for him and let him enter the Fortune Pavilion to listen to the teachings, said Middle Heavenly Venerate. Everyone who originally thought that they owed Yi Shiwen a big favor this time raised their heads and looked at Yi Shiwen and the Middle Heavenly Venerate. This reward could not be said to be good. Yi Shiwen was a little puzzled. What was this Fortune Pavilion? He had never heard of it. However, looking at everyone's expressions, it was obvious that they knew about it. He could not help but send a voice transmission to the War Elder. As a veteran of the Fortune God Dynasty, he should know about this aspect. Soon, the War Elder told him about the origin of the Fortune Pavilion. It turned out that there was a remnant soul of the Fortune God Lord in the Fortune Pavilion. It had existed for countless years. In the early years, a considerable number of powerhouses had entered the Fortune Pavilion to listen to the Fortune God Lord's teachings. Chapter 35:59. This was also the place where the Fortune Creation Heavenly Lord used to preach. When the Fortune Creation Heavenly Lord was still around, he would often give lectures in the Fortune Pavilion. However, after the Fortune Creation Heavenly Lord left, this place became deserted. However, because Heavenly Lord Fortune Creation had been preaching in there all year round, a strand of his primordial spirit had been left behind. After so many years, it was a great opportunity to hear the Fortune Creation Heavenly Lord preach, even if it was just a wisp of his spirit. Generally, only those who had made great contributions to the Fortune Creation Heavenly Lord could listen to his spirit preach. Although it was not as good as the Fortune Creation Heavenly Lord's preaching, it was still very effective. This time, Yi Shiwen had naturally made a great contribution to the Fortune God dynasty. If not for Yi Shiwen's warning, then the Fortune God dynasty's army would have been annihilated. Even more than half of these heavenly venerables would have perished. The losses were much greater than the 10 Divine Cities Coalition army's previous attack. At that time, the world would truly be in chaos. The experts who could listen to the preaching in the Fortune Pavilion would often break through after they came out. Therefore, over time, the preaching in the Fortune Pavilion became shrouded in a layer of mystery. For the Heavenly Masters, there was nothing more delightful than directly breaking through to the next realm. Yi Shiwen calculated for a moment. Now that he was in the 6th realm, it would not be difficult for him to reach the peak of the 6th realm when the world tree fruit ripened. At that time, the 7th realm would be right in front of him. Once he stepped into the 7th realm, there would be only a few people in the world who could do anything to him. Coupled with the supreme ancestral symbol, he would truly have no need to fear anyone. For him, this reward was the best reward he could get. It was not in vain that he had worked so hard. After the initial astonishment, everyone quickly calmed down. This was because Yi Shiwen's contribution this time was indeed worthy of entering the Fortune Pavilion to listen to the teachings of Yi Shiwen. However, because the Fortune Creation Heavenly Lord had left for a long time, the spirit he left behind had become weaker and weaker after listening to the preaching many times. Under such circumstances, the more preaching he preached, the weaker he would be. Therefore, the number of preaching sessions gradually decreased. It wasn't as frequent as it was in the beginning, so such opportunities were becoming more and more precious. All right, apart from this matter, there's also the matter of dealing with the aftermath. I originally wanted to start selecting a candidate for the Eastern Heavenly Venerate after the Battle of Moon City. Now, this matter has to be postponed. I have to rebuild Moon City first before considering this issue. The Middle Heavenly Venerate glanced at the crowd. He knew that there were many people who were determined to obtain the position of Eastern Heavenly Venerate. But now, these things had to be delayed to make way for the reconstruction of Moon City. This was also the most important thing at the moment. The most important thing about Moon City wasn't the city itself, but its location. It happened to be the biggest loophole in the entire epic battlefield. Just taking down Moon City wasn't enough. They had to rebuild Moon City's defenses so that the entire epic battlefield defenses could return to normal. At the very least, it wouldn't be exploited by the other ancient eras. Otherwise, there would be no point in taking back Moon City. In the face of this matter, nothing else mattered. Just getting rid of the residual energy from the explosion wasn't a simple task. It required the cooperation of all the Heavenly Venerables. Wait a minute, I still have something to say. Spacetime Heavenly Venerate suddenly said. Besides choosing a new Eastern Heavenly Venerate, we also have to choose a new Moon City Lord. We are like a group of dragons without a leader. This won't do. Can't we choose a new candidate after he defected? Many people's eyes lit up. When they heard Spacetime Heavenly Venerate say this, they suddenly remembered that not only could they fight for the position of Eastern Heavenly Venerate, but they could also fight for the vacant position now that the Moon City Lord had defected. In the past, the position of Eastern Heavenly Venerate and Moon City Lord had rarely been vacant even once in a million years. This was also why Spacetime Heavenly Venerate had been leading the heroes of the Central region and working hard for the Fortune God dynasty for so many years, but still hadn't been able to be promoted. This was because there simply wasn't a vacant position. These top Heavenly Venerates lived as long as the world and were immortal. Under normal circumstances, there was no such thing as retirement. Unless they died in battle or something else happened, there would be a vacancy for them. However, the probability of this happening was too small. Hence, everyone had been scrambling for the position of Eastern Heavenly Venerate. The benefits of successfully obtaining the position were too great. However, no one had expected that a series of events would occur during the fight for the position of Middle Heavenly Venerate. In the end, the Moon City Lord had defected, and another position had been vacated. The Moon City Lord's position was originally not lower than that of the Eastern Heavenly Venerate. However, the Moon City had been ruined beyond recognition. Coupled with the defection of the previous Moon City Lord, the remaining experts and elites of the Moon City couldn't all be trusted. A group of them had to be eliminated. Hence, it was unknown how long it would take for the Moon City to return to its former glory. It would probably be at the bottom of the 10 great divine cities for a long time. Although the Sky City had been at the top of the 10 great divine cities, the other cities were basically equal. Now, the Moon City would probably be at the bottom for a long time. Even so, the position of Moon City Lord was still very attractive. Only by becoming an existence at that level could one become one of the few people at the peak of the Fortune God dynasty. The Middle Heavenly Venerate glanced at everyone. Although they didn't speak, their faces were filled with eagerness. Obviously, they were also very interested in the position of Moon City Lord. All right, you're right. After this matter is over and the Eastern Heavenly Venerate is elected, we will also elect the position of Moon City Lord. The capable and virtuous will occupy it, said the Middle Heavenly Venerate. He didn't object to this. This was an inevitable trend. No one could stop it. When everyone heard the Middle Heavenly Venerate say this, they immediately became excited. There was one more position to fight for. All right, everyone go down. Let's attack together. Now, apart from us, even the Emperor Lords can't remove the remnant energy. The Middle Heavenly Venerate ordered. The Middle Heavenly Venerates flew out one after another, taking the lead and flying towards the Moon City. At this time, in the Moon City, countless energies were still vibrating. If no one cleaned them up, they could exist forever. Yishuan also went in head first. The Battle of the Moon City had finally come to an end. Chapter 3560. The Battle of Moon City had come to an end, but the uproar it caused was just the beginning. The news reached the 10 great divine cities in the shortest time possible. Everyone was shocked. Even the craziest person would not have thought that the situation would turn out like this. With the Fortune God dynasty's strength and the Fortune Universe map, it was only a matter of time before they conquered the Moon City. Then there was the question of how many losses they had suffered. Even the craziest person, regardless of how dissatisfied the Fortune Divine Dynasty was with the 10 great divine cities experts, guessed that they were only 1/10 as strong as the Fortune Divine Dynasty. Yet, this was already a heaven-defying feat. Only the ancient era's Moon Cities experts could achieve such a feat, however. That was only a guess. Although the ancient era and the Fortune God dynasty had an irreconcilable grudge, there were many other eras that were also part of the ancient era. If the ancient era and the Fortune God dynasty fought to the death, it would only benefit others. But when the battle reports of heavy losses came from the front line, everyone was dumbfounded. The 10 divine cities' armies were also among these losses. Although they were much better off than the last time when almost every family was in mourning, after suffering the first heavy blow, they had suffered another heavy loss. This undoubtedly put the 10 divine cities under great pressure. At first, no one dared to believe it. This was completely outside of everyone's expectations. But soon, more detailed battle reports arrived. It turned out that the demonic path epic had buried an array formation in Moon City. After it self-detonated, the army that had set off this time had lost a third of its forces. This number was even higher than the number of experts that the 10 divine cities had lost in the past 100 million years of the origin battlefield combined. Being attacked by the Devil era twice in a row and suffering such heavy losses, many people from the 10 divine cities were filled with righteous indignation. They were riled up and swore to teach the Devil era a lesson. Although the Fortune God dynasty didn't have the upper hand when facing the Ancient Era, that was only when facing the entire Ancient Era. If they faced any one of the Ancient Era alone, the Fortune God dynasty would have an overwhelming advantage. Facing any Ancient Era, the Fortune God dynasty had the ability to destroy them. Under such circumstances, the fact that the two expeditions had suffered heavy losses did not make them afraid. On the contrary, it made them extremely furious. The fall of Moon City had a lot to do with the demonic epic. Most of the living creatures in Moon City were massacred after the fall. There was a blood feud between the two sides. The Fortune Divine Dynasty had never suffered such a huge loss since the establishment of the 10 Great Divine Cities defensive line. It had always been the Ancient Era's armies that were badly battered by the 10 Divine Cities defensive line. The Fortune Divine Dynasty only needed to pay a small price to block the Ancient Era's armies, making it difficult for them to advance. This was also the reason why the Fortune Divine Dynasty could easily block the Ancient Era's armies. Without this defensive line, the Ancient Era's armies could easily break through any of the defensive lines. But no matter how the lower levels clamored, the upper levels of the 10 divine cities remained silent. The demonic epic wasn't easy to deal with. Even a middle heavenly venerable with the Fortune Universe map couldn't occupy a piece of land. It wasn't impossible to forcefully uproot the demonic epic, but the price they had to pay was too high. Most importantly, after a series of events, the Fortune Divine Dynasty's strength had suffered heavy losses. It was likely that they wouldn't be able to suppress the Fortune world anymore. The Fortune Divine Dynasty was invincible in the world. It didn't rely on the Fortune Heavenly Monarch's prestige or the Fortune Heavenly Monarch's prestige. It relied on overwhelming superiority. Now, after suffering heavy losses, their superiority was no longer so obvious. Although there were many conflicts between the 10 Great Divine Cities and the Fortune Divine Dynasty's central government, and they were at loggerheads with each other for a long time, in the end, the 10 Great Divine Cities and the Fortune Divine Dynasty's central government were two sides of the same coin, sharing the same common interests. The disputes between the 10 Great Divine Cities and the Fortune Divine Dynasty's central government were merely a matter of who had more benefits. If the Fortune Divine Dynasty fell into a crisis, they wouldn't be any better. Troubled times, within Heaven City, a sigh was heard. The other Divine City's city lords also sighed. They were bound to experience a reign of terror in the coming days. The outer regions would also stir. They had never given up on the idea of regaining control of the Fortune world. At this time, although everyone had expected that there would be no peace after this, the speed of the sudden change was still too fast. Although the battle report of the Battle of Moon City had been sealed, it soon reached the Fortune Divine Dynasty. Once this news spread, it immediately caused an uproar in the entire Fortune world. From the Fortune Divine Dynasty's central region, it instantly spread to the east, south, west, and west regions. Normally, it would be easy for the Fortune Divine Dynasty to suppress this kind of news, but for some unknown reason, the news spread like wildfire throughout the entire Fortune Divine Dynasty, and even to the outer worlds. Almost overnight, everyone knew that the Fortune Divine Dynasty had suffered heavy losses in the crusade against the Moon City. Unlike the 10 Divine Cities, because they were closer to the battlefield, they were able to obtain accurate information. They also knew that only 1/3 of the Fortune Divine Dynasty's forces had been lost. Although it was indeed a huge loss and a huge blow to the Fortune Divine Dynasty, it was not a calamity. However, when this news spread throughout the Fortune world, it completely changed. The news of the Fortune Divine Dynasty's army being annihilated had already spread like wildfire. If it was an ordinary incident, it might not be a big deal, but the annihilation of the entire army was too terrifying. This time, the Fortune Divine Dynasty had brought a lot of elites with them, more than half of their forces. If the entire army was annihilated, the consequences would be unimaginable. Overnight, the entire Fortune Divine dynasty fell into a sea of rumors. Many people fell into a state of panic and unease. Although the Fortune Divine dynasty was unavoidable, it was controlled within a certain range. For the Fortune Divine dynasty's central government, these people's battles were like raising venomous insects. Only through continuous battles, the one who stood out could not only become the king of venomous insects, but could also ascend to become a dragon. If the entire world was like a pool of stagnant water, then the world would soon be finished. If it was just a rumor, it wouldn't be a big deal. However, the situation had changed too quickly. In a single night, the news spread out. Armies from all directions had gathered to attack the Fortune God dynasty. In an instant, the world was plunged into the flames of war. This was a true disaster. Countless sects were attacked, and numerous large tribes were annihilated in a single night. Countless prefectures and counties were plunged into the flames of war. Numerous foreign domains forces swept through the Fortune Divine dynasty's defensive line like a fish leaping into the Fortune Divine dynasty's territory. At this time, the Fortune Divine dynasty's defensive line was like a piece of paper, easily broken through. Although most of the experts were taken away by the Middle Heavenly Venerables, one could imagine the terror of this wave of foreign invaders. Compared to this, the previous operation to besiege the Fortune Divine capital was nothing more than a joke. The Fortune Divine dynasty occupied the Fortune world's spiritual energy and was the most prosperous place. It had always been the target of many foreign imperial families, and now they were attacking the Fortune Divine capital unscrupulously. Endless killing, plundering, and the flames of war broke out in the Fortune Divine dynasty's territory. Facing such a situation, countless Fortune Divine dynasty's cultivators, and various tribes stepped forward bravely to fight against these foreign invaders. Although the Middle Heavenly Venerables had taken away a large number of experts, it didn't mean that the Fortune Divine dynasty's territory could not withstand a single blow. After all, the Fortune Divine dynasty didn't have the means to control all of its forces. All kinds of large sects and powerful tribes rose up to resist because this wasn't the time to fight for benefits. They could still have a backup plan, but it was for survival. In the face of death, fighting for benefits was a joke. There was nothing more important than this. Above the eastern region's land, countless cracks appeared in the sky. Endless armies and iron hose galloped towards the Fortune Divine dynasty's territory. Although the Fortune Divine dynasty's large sects and families rose up to resist, in the face of this level of war, they had no way to resist. One by one, they were breached. At this time, the Fortune Divine dynasty's role was highlighted. Without the Fortune Divine dynasty as its core, the entire Fortune Divine dynasty's strength was like a plate of loose sand, unable to withstand a single blow and unable to stop the foreign invaders. Originally, in the Fortune Divine dynasty, large sects and families with emperors could be said to be as stable as Mount Tai. Under normal circumstances, emperors were already extreme Tao masters, and they were very difficult to kill. These sects and clans usually had a history of tens of millions of years, or even hundreds of millions of years. It was very normal. Even in the Fortune Divine dynasty's internal strife, he could be as steady as Mount Tai. Although he was not as powerful as those super forces with Empyreans overseeing them, he could directly reach the heavens and communicate with the Fortune Divine dynasty's higher echelons. But it was enough. However, these behemoths that had stood tall in the Fortune Divine dynasty's various domains for hundreds of millions of years, instilling fear in countless people, had fallen in a matter of seconds. Even if this world-ending war alarmed the old antiques and ancestors of the sects and families, facing the foreign invaders that came with world-destroying momentum, they couldn't stop them. Even the Imperial Emperor Realm Patriarchs would be instantly grabbed by a large hand that appeared out of nowhere and crushed to pieces as soon as they flew up. In the foreign domains, Heavenly Venerables followed the army into battle. Chapter 3561. In fact, with such a large-scale expedition, countless foreign imperial families had to follow suit. Apart from heavenly venerables, who else had the power to make foreign imperial families submit to them? In recent years, the foreign domains had rarely been able to pose a fatal threat to the Fortune Divine dynasty. It was not because they were chased out of the Fortune Divine dynasty, but because they were like a plate of loose sand, fighting and killing each other. They did not have a strong core like the Fortune Divine dynasty to lead them into battle. And now, they seem to have found such a core. In one night, foreign imperial families from all directions attacked at the same time. This kind of tacit understanding meant that there was a powerful figure behind all this. Although they were caught off guard, the Fortune God dynasty's higher echelons could see through it. In the past, foreign imperial families were hostile to each other, and it was rare for them to attack at the same time. If there wasn't a huge benefit involved, it would be impossible. But now, it didn't look like there was a huge benefit involved, because it wasn't easy to invade the Fortune God dynasty. Who knew how many foreign imperial families would collapse and be exterminated? No one would be so stupid as to become cannon fodder for others. But this situation still happened. One could imagine what kind of force was driving this from behind. Everyone seemed to see a giant hand covering the sky, blocking the entire Fortune God dynasty's airspace. The entire Fortune God dynasty's territory was in shambles. Many of the human prefectures were in a state of panic. Many rumors spread throughout the prefectures in one night about the annihilation of the Fortune God dynasty's army. Originally, the matters of the Fortune God dynasty's higher echelons were too far away from them. But this time, the Fortune God dynasty's army consisted of millions of human race elites. Most importantly, the human race's spiritual leader, as well as their de facto protector, Yi Shiwen, was also tagging along with the Fortune God dynasty's army. Compared to the annihilation of millions of elites, what was more terrifying was Yi Shiwen's death. The human race could be said to be like the sun in the sky, extremely powerful. In the entire eastern region, they were one of the most powerful races. And it was all thanks to Yi Shiwen's existence that they were able to obtain such a status. With his strength alone, he suppressed all those who disobeyed him. No one dared to act against the human race under his watch. As long as Yi Shiwen was around, even if the human race was on the verge of extinction, they could still develop again. This was the most crucial point. All the higher-ups of the human race knew that the current situation of the human race seemed to be flourishing, but in reality, it was like adding oil to a raging fire. If they were not careful, they could all be destroyed. The foundation of the human race was too weak. The only thing worthy of praise was the existence of revered martial artist Yi Shiwen. Therefore, when this news came, the entire human race was in a panic. No one could bear the consequences. Many rumors began to circulate in secret. In this situation, even the higher-ups of the human race could do nothing about it. To put it bluntly, the human race had yet to develop the boldness and confidence of a truly powerful race. A willpower that would not change its expression even if Mount Tai collapsed in front of it. It would have been fine if it was under normal circumstances, but in the face of this monstrous wave that could drown the entire Fortune Divine dynasty, he started to panic. Not to mention others. Even the higher echelons of the human race were panicking because they didn't know the exact situation of the epic battlefield. The epic battlefield was too far away, and the confidence and intelligence of the human race didn't extend to that extent. At this time, they could only wait for the final news to arrive. Compared to the intelligence and news of the epic battlefield, which they didn't know the exact situation, the current predicament of the eastern region was the biggest problem. With the strength of the human race, they naturally couldn't take care of the situation of the other regions. Just the situation of the eastern region alone was enough to cause the entire eastern region to be in a state of panic. The Foreign Forces Army had arrived too quickly in the Stormy Sea region. The entire Stormy Sea region was the Foreign Forces territory. Therefore, even the Fortune Divine dynasty's intelligence department did not notice the mobilization of the foreign forces in the Stormy Sea region. Once the Stormy Sea region's creatures were dispatched, They swept through the entire coast of the Stormy Sea region as easily as breaking dry weeds and smashing rotten wood. Storm City, which had once been like a boulder guarding the Stormy Sea region, was also pacified overnight. The Stormy Sea region, which had been besieged countless times, couldn't even stop the foreign army for a moment in this wave of frenzy. As the army swept through, the sects and powerful tribes stationed along the coast fell one after another. This news flowed towards the human race's headquarters, Mount Bujo, like a tidal wave. News of the uprooted large sects and sects would arrive almost every day or two. No one knew how long these large sects had existed for, but they were destroyed just like that. The terrifying speed of the advance shocked the entire human race. The human race was located in the central region of the eastern region, so the foreign army couldn't kill their way to the human race's headquarters in a short time. However, at this speed, it was only a matter of time before they reached the human race's 11 prefectures. The current foundation of the human race was naturally much stronger than those large sects and powerful tribes. However, according to the strength of the foreign army, the human race wasn't much better. The entire eastern region was immersed in an atmosphere of anxiety. According to the information obtained, no one could stop the advance of the foreign army. Either they surrendered to the foreign army, or they were destroyed under the iron hooves of the foreign army. There was no other possibility. At this time, the real leader of the human race was none other than Feng Yishe. Among the human race, the people who were originally qualified to make decisions had already left with Yishiwen. Bian Xiaoyu was Yishiwen's direct disciple. Although her cultivation wasn't top-notch, but she had the right to make decisions for the human race. Next was the human emperor. This was the nominal leader of the human race. After Yishiwen became a heavenly master, he didn't deprive the human emperor of his position. Naturally, he was the leader of the human race. Next was the strongest, the sky-shaking Thunder Emperor. At the same time, everyone knew that the sky-shaking Thunder Emperor had a special relationship with Yishiwen. These three people were the Emperor Kings with the highest status in the human race. However, they weren't here now. Next to them was Feng Yishe, one of the oldest Emperor Kings of the human race. He had gone through fire and water for the human race. No one knew how many disasters and tribulations he had endured. He had an extremely high prestige in the human race. Under such great changes, Feng Yishe and the other Emperor Kings of the human race were anxious. More than 20 Emperor Kings had gathered here. Feng Yishe sat in the seat of honor and glanced around. Among these Emperor Kings, there were only 3 of them, including him. The others were from different clans and sections. Basically, they were from the big clans and sects that lived in the 11 provinces. Although the human race ruled the 11 provinces, they didn't exterminate the other clans and sections. Therefore, many experts from other clans and sects came to join the human race. Normally, this didn't seem like a big deal. As long as Yishiwen was here, the other clans and sects wouldn't have a chance to overturn the heavens. But now, it seemed that there was some pressure. The proportion of the human race was too small. Even for him, his cultivation had advanced by leaps and bounds in the past 10,000 years. With Yishiwen's lectures from time to time, he had only broken through to the 7th realm. This was thanks to his many years of cultivation foundation. Even so, such a cultivation base couldn't suppress everyone among these Emperor Kings. He could only be regarded as one of the best. There were several Emperor Kings from other clans who were on par with him. After all, the human race's foundation was too weak. Fortunately, the prestige that Yishiwen had established in the last 10,000 years was still present. Even when there were rumors that the Fortune Divine Dynasty's army had been annihilated and Yishiwen had fallen in the battle, no one dared to provoke him. After all, this was just a rumor. There was no proof. Everyone, let's talk about the recent situation. Feng Yishe said, fellow Taoist Feng Yishe, this is a disaster for the entire eastern region. But to us, it might not be a bad thing. At this time, a foreign emperor said, although Mount Tai is pressing down on us, there are also many experts from other clans who have nowhere else to go. They have entered the 11 prefectures, seeking our protection. If we can recruit these experts, even if we can only recruit 1/10 of them, it will be enough for our 11 prefectures to develop by leaps and bounds. Feng Yishe nodded. These foreign emperor kings thought differently from a human emperor like him. In Feng Yishe's heart, the human race was the true master of the 11 prefectures. However, these foreign emperor kings were also thinking for the sake of the 11 prefectures. With the support of the human race, they could avoid the danger of destruction. The stronger the human race was, the more benefits they could get. And everyone, pay attention to this. As long as the experts from other clans are willing to submit to our 11 prefectures, we will take them in. But be careful. Don't let anyone with bad intentions sneak in. Feng Yishe said. And the other emperor kings nodded. Also, everyone should be aware of the recent situation. There are rumors that Honorable Wu Zun has fallen. Now, I can tell you that these are all nonsense. I called you here to ask you to order a thorough investigation. Whoever spread these rumors, kill them. I'd rather kill 1,000 people than let a single one go. I'll make it clear that there is no room for negotiation on this matter. Don't say that I didn't warn you. When a matter really happens, don't say that I don't appreciate your kindness. Feng Yishe swept his gaze over the crowd and said. At this time, he didn't know whether Yi Shiwen was still alive or not. But no matter what, he had to deny all unfavorable news. Otherwise, the human race would fall apart in front of him. Chapter 3562. All the sovereign emperors had solemn expressions as well. No matter what they were thinking, they were all thinking the same thing when it came to stabilizing the current situation. Clearly, it was not beneficial for them to cause a ruckus at this time. If they caused any internal strife at this time, they would collapse before they even faced the foreign army. Feng Yishe glanced at the emperors and felt a headache coming on. During this period of time, the 11 prefectures were full of rumors that couldn't be stopped. This situation was inseparable from the people in front of him. Even if they didn't add fuel to the fire, they probably acquiesced in it. Everyone wanted to know if the pillar of the 11 prefectures, Wu Zun, had fallen or not. This was probably a means to force him to abdicate. But for now, the situation could still be suppressed. No accurate news came, which was the best news. Moreover, he didn't believe that the Fortune God dynasty's army would be completely annihilated. He didn't have an accurate understanding of the epic battlefield, but he had enough understanding of the Fortune God dynasty's army. Yi Shiwen led 3 human race emperors and 1 million elites to the epic battlefield. However, such a scale was quite inconspicuous in the Fortune God dynasty's army. It was far inferior to the lineup led by middle heavenly masters and other top heavenly masters. Such a scale could easily destroy the human race 10,000 times over. How could it be completely annihilated? Moreover, he increasingly felt that the reason why this rumor had spread so quickly was probably related to the invasion of the Outland Realms army. The foreign army's joint attack was unprecedented in scale. It was absolutely impossible for it to be a last-minute plan. They must have been preparing for a long time. They just wanted to take advantage of the fact that most of the Fortune God dynasty's elite troops weren't here. How long had it been? 1/3 of the eastern region had already fallen. Even the 11 prefectures in the central part of the eastern region could feel the sharp hooves of the foreign army's iron hooves. It was suffocating. Even if the Fortune God dynasty had lost most of its elite troops, it shouldn't be so weak. Most importantly, there was no one who could stand up and take charge of the situation. All the sects and clans were fighting for themselves. How could they resist the foreign army's thunderous attack? Now that the Eastern Heavenly Venerate wasn't around, the only faction in the entire eastern region that had the qualifications and ability to lead the masses was probably the Heavenly Tao sect. However, there had been no news from the Heavenly Path sect. The legendary Heavenly Path sect leader had not appeared either. He seemed to be watching everything coldly. Without super sects and super powerful clans like the Heavenly Taoism taking action, the others would not have such prestige at all. The Silver Moon clan's prestige and strength were second only to the Heavenly Tao sect, but they didn't appear either. The Silver Moon clan's patriarch, Heavenly Venerate Silver Moon, had followed the Eastern Heavenly Venerate to the epic battlefield. She had also mobilized a considerable portion of the Silver Moon clan's elites. Right now, it seemed like they could only protect themselves. Funny family didn't know what was going on in the other areas, but the battle in the East area was indeed strange and mysterious. He couldn't see through it, and the situation was like a fog. Both the Heavenly Tao sect and the Silver Moon clan were protecting themselves. They didn't want to stand out and organize an allied force to fight against the allied forces of the other regions. Therefore, many people looked at the Human Clan because the Human Clan was the third behemoth in the eastern region that had a Heavenly Venerate. They controlled 11 prefectures, second only to the Heavenly Tao sect and the Silver Moon clan. Under normal circumstances, no one would put the Human Clan's foundation and strength on the same level as the Heavenly Tao sect and the Silver Moon clan. However, in this critical situation, all of this was unavoidable. Funny family, who was temporarily in charge of the overall situation of the Human Clan, had already received messages from many large clans and sects, trying to find out the Human Clan's intentions in this regard. No matter how despicable they were, no matter how wrong they were, they had to do their best to unite at this time. Only then could they survive. No matter how much they denied the status of the Human Clan, they needed a force to stand up for them now. Apart from this matter, the most important thing is that the various clans and sects have placed their hopes on the Human Clan. They hope that the Human Clan will come forward and organize an allied force to fight against the allied forces of the other regions. What do you think? Fengishir glanced at the crowd and said, in recent years, under the influence of Yi Shiwen, Fengishir had also changed his habit of wearing animal skins. Now, he only wore a noble imperial robe, which gave him endless majesty. Many people were not surprised when they heard this. Although they weren't in charge of the 11 prefectures, some people still passed the message to them. Many of them were peak sovereign emperors who were usually aloof. At this time, they spoke to them in a pleasant manner, without the slightest bit of arrogance. They were very clear that this was because the 11 prefectures were their backing. No matter how weak the foundation of the 11 prefectures was, it was still much stronger than those ordinary large clans and sections. The so-called weak and insufficient was relative to the Heavenly Tao sect and the Silver Moon clan, which had occupied the eastern region for countless years. Although there were no peak sovereign emperors in the Human Clan at this time, the title of revered martial artist was enough to make those who wanted to provoke give up. However, after hearing Fengyi family's official statement, many people's expressions changed suddenly. Fellow Taoist Fengyi family, at this time, the allied forces of the other regions are in full swing. Wherever the iron hooves pass, not even a blade of grass is left. Even the Heavenly Tao sect and the Silver Moon clan have to avoid such a sharp edge. If our 11 prefectures come forward to organize the allied forces at this time, won't we be at the heart of the struggle? I'm afraid that the allied forces of the other regions will come to our 11 prefectures in the next moment. A foreign sovereign emperor said. This also represented the opinion of a considerable number of sovereign emperors. They shuddered at the thought of the rolling iron hooves of the allied forces of the other regions. Although they were sovereign emperors, it was precisely because of this that they could obtain a lot of information that ordinary people didn't know. Naturally, they were very clear about how terrifying the allied forces of the other regions were. Now, everyone was afraid to avoid them. They could only hope that the allied forces of the other regions would not target them. I don't agree with this view. If we don't come forward to organize the allied forces, won't the allied forces of the other regions wipe us out? Don't forget that the allied forces of the other regions have already captured 1/3 of the eastern region. It's only a matter of time before they reach us. If we come forward to organize the allied forces, we can still rely on the strength of the allied forces to protect ourselves. This is the best way to protect ourselves. But almost immediately, a human sovereign emperor spoke up. This was a human sovereign who had just become a human sovereign. Why were the foreign domains allied forces not a match for our Fortune Divine dynasty before? Because they were scattered like a sheet of loose sand. On the other hand, why was the entire defensive line of our Fortune Divine Dynasty so vulnerable during this period of time? Isn't it because we fought separately and were defeated one by one? Therefore, I think that if we want to protect ourselves, we should organize the Allied forces and use the strength of the Allied forces to contend against the Allied forces of the other regions. This is the best way to protect ourselves. This was the intention of another faction. It wasn't that they weren't afraid of the iron hooves of the Allied forces of the other regions. These sovereign emperors had fought with the foreign domains' imperial families many times, and naturally understood the terror and brutality of those foreign domains' imperial families. Compared to them, these foreign domains' imperial families were fighting almost all the time. Those who could survive were the best of the best. But the more it was so, the more likely it was that relying on the strength of the 11 prefectures to resist the allied forces of the other region's Stormy Sea region. Only by relying on the strength of everyone could they resist. This human sovereign's words also caused the other sovereign emperors to fall silent, especially many of them who were tempted. If they could avoid fighting, it would naturally be the best. If they faced the allied forces of the other regions alone, the consequences would be unimaginable. But the current situation was not up to them at all. The allied forces of the other region's forces had already reached a place not far from the 11 prefectures. Sooner or later, they would sweep over, and it was just a matter of a few days. Under such circumstances, why didn't they organize the allied forces to protect themselves? Could it be that they had to be like many big clans and sects, surrendering to the vanguard of the allied forces of the other regions to protect their own orthodoxy? This was simply a great shame, and the allied forces of the other regions would not be so polite to these people who surrendered. They would directly use them as the vanguard to attack other big clans and sects who were unwilling to surrender, so they didn't have many choices. They could either be wiped out by the allied forces of the other regions, or be driven by the allied forces of the other regions to fight and die. Okay, both of you have a point. Now, raise your hands to vote. Feng Yishe glanced at the crowd and said, "Those who agree to organize the allied forces, raise your hands." His control was still too weak, and he didn't have the advantage in terms of strength. If Yishiwen was present, he could immediately make the decision. The Sacred Heart dictated everything, and he didn't need to say anything to them. Yishiwen made the decision, and they only needed to obey. In the past, when Yishiwen was here, he didn't care about big things, so he didn't feel any inconvenience. But now that Yishiwen was not here, he realized how big the difference was between having such a stabilizing force and not having such a stabilizing force. The emperors looked at each other, but in an instant, they had already figured out the pros and cons and raised their hands one after another. There were only a few who were unwilling. The others weren't stupid. It seemed that if they didn't organize the allied forces at this time, they wouldn't become the target of the allied forces of the other regions. But once the allied forces swept their eyes over, they would be dead. Since that was the case, it was better to fight to the death. Well, since most of you agree to organize the allied forces, then listen to my orders. After everyone goes back, mobilize the armies of your clans and sects, and wait for orders at any time. The armies of the 11 regions must also be mobilized. As for the letters to the other sects and big clans, I will personally send them. Feng Yishe said, "In this battle, everyone must work together. If we fail, I think you all know the consequences." Chapter 3563. All the emperors nodded in agreement. In this situation, they all knew what the consequences would be if they failed. The allied forces would sweep through the 11 prefectures, and they wouldn't be able to escape. However, on the other hand, if they succeeded, it would only be a matter of time before the prestige of the 11 prefectures led by the human race skyrocketed. By then, even if their foundation wasn't strong enough, they would be able to stand shoulder to shoulder with the Heavenly Tao and the Silver Moon clan. After all, the Heavenly Taoism pretended to be deaf and mute, and the Silver Moon clan only cared about self-preservation. If the human clan stood up for the great sects and clans, they would win endless prestige. All the great sects and clans in the Eastern Domain would owe them a favor. In this case, the foundation of the human clan and the 11 prefectures would be stable and deeply rooted. But if they failed, all of this would be for naught, and they would all die. None of them would be able to escape. Besides, the Eastern Domain had already fallen into the flames of war. Even if they wanted to escape, where could they go? Plus, they all had the support of the great sects and clans, so they couldn't escape at all. Following Fengyi's order, everyone began to move. Some mobilized the army, some mobilized the logistics. The 11 prefectures were like a sophisticated military machine, rumbling and running. Unlike before, when they were still observing and only mobilizing a portion of their forces, this time, the human race completely mobilized all of their forces. This was because everyone knew very well that once the human race formed an allied army, they would definitely become a thorn in the side of the allied army. It was absolutely impossible for them not to fight. Fengyi's personally written invitations were also sent to the leaders and patriarchs of the great sects and clans in the remaining 2/3 of the Eastern Domain in a short period of time. For a moment, the entire Eastern Domain was in an uproar. After such a long time, when half of the Eastern Domain had fallen, someone finally stood up. Originally, the rightful ruler of the Eastern Domain, the Eastern Celestial Sovereign Manor, had been completely silent. But now, the human clan was not afraid of hardships and dangers. They called for the heroes of the world to gather in Mount Buzhou and form the core defense line to resist the attack of the allied forces. This call attracted the support of many large clans and sects, especially those facing the front lines. Without the allied army, they would have to face the allied army alone, and they wouldn't have any chance of survival. The large clans and sects in the eastern region and near the central region also responded. No one wanted the flames of war to spread to their own territories. Under such circumstances, even the heavenly Taoism, which had the Grand Master of the Heavenly Master Realm, could not say that it was absolutely safe, let alone the heavenly Taoists. Therefore, it was almost inevitable that they would unite. However, in the face of this call, neither the heavenly Taoism nor the Silver Moon clan responded. It was as if they had completely ignored the call of the human clan. Not only them, but even their vassal clans and sects did not respond at all. They had no intention of listening to the call of the human clan. Even so, the human race still received many calls. Over 100 great sects and clans responded to the call, wanting to join the allied army and fight to the death against the foreign allied army. For a time, all the outstanding heroes gathered, and the wind and clouds of the eastern region gathered for the human clan. Finally, all eyes fell on the human clan. After Yi Shiwen's attainment, the human clan once again became the focus of everyone's attention. They were in the teeth of the storm and, similarly, became the target of public criticism. The undercurrents of the entire eastern region rushed towards the human clan and towards Mount Buzhou. Fortunately, Yi Shiwen had left a very powerful enchantment in Mount Buzhou. No emperor could act presumptuously on Mount Buzhou. Otherwise, they would be courting death. This was also the unique heritage of the super sects and super powerful clans. Without a Grand Master of the Heavenly Master Realm, it was impossible to arrange such a contingency. Day after day, more and more experts gathered on Buzhou Mountain. The leaders and leaders of the great sects and clans were all here. Ordinary people didn't need to do anything, but these imperial emperors needed to be personally received by Fengyi clan. In just a short period of time, the entire Buzhou Mountain was bustling with activities to receive these top-notch experts from outside. Many of these experts wanted to go to the Divine Palace to have a look. After all, it was the place where the legendary Marshal Revered had established the Taoist rite. However, Fengyi clan refused. He could not make the decision for Yi Shiwen. It was impossible for him to even think about it. Seeing Fengyi clan's firm attitude, these people finally left in embarrassment. However, the entire allied army was still in full swing. More and more troops were mobilized, ready to go to the front line to resist the invasion of the foreign allied army. For a time, the human race seemed to be able to mobilize the power of the entire eastern region, becoming the center of the eastern region. At this time of panic, what was needed was such a pillar. No matter how high and mighty one was normally, at this time, if one did not have the courage to stand up, he would not be qualified to lead the masses. These days, the elites of the human race on Bujo Mountain had finally witnessed what it meant by as many experts as there are clouds in the sky. Those emperors, whom they could not normally see, appeared in front of them one after another like dumplings being thrown into a pot. Experts of the quasi-emperor level also appeared in batches. These were the elites of the various large clans and sections. Naturally, they had to bring their elites to this battle. Otherwise, how could they resist the menacing coalition forces of the foreign domains? This time, the foreign allied army was clearly planning to destroy the Fortune God dynasty. The self-preservation methods that they had in the past could not be used at this time. Otherwise, they would be the next ones to die. For a time, it created an unprecedentedly grand scene. Even when Yishuan achieved the Tao, there was definitely not such a grand scene of so many emperors coming to Mount Bujo at the same time. Just as the human race was doing their best to organize the allied army to resist the foreign allied army, the Fortune God dynasty's allied army on the battlefield finally received the news. They immediately organized a meeting, and all the heavenly masters who were extinguishing the remnant energy in Moon City also gathered. When they received this news, none of the heavenly venerables believed it. What kind of joke was this? No matter how weak the Fortune Divine Dynasty's forces were, it was more than enough to suppress the foreign lands. If the homeland was not stable, how could they dare to come here? However, judging from the situation they had now, the Outland Alliance army was simply invincible. There was not a single person who could stop them. Without them, the Fortune God dynasty was like a group of dragons without a leader. They could not even find a heavenly master to take the lead against the foreign allied army. Even the heavenly Tao sect, which clearly had a heavenly master, still chose to protect themselves. They did not take action at all to avoid becoming the target of the foreign allied army. After receiving the specific information, everyone was dumbfounded. They did not understand why the heavenly Tao sect would do this. Indeed, the foreign allied army seemed to be coming in menacingly, but it was not impossible to stop them. If a top expert like the heavenly Tao sect leader took action, he could still delay them for a considerable period of time. Then, when the heavenly Tao sect's army returned, they could launch a thunderous counterattack and annihilate the foreign allied army that dared to enter the Fortune God dynasty's territory. However, in a situation where there was clearly a better choice, the heavenly Tao sect and other local tyrants and large sects made the decision to protect themselves instead of standing out. Many heavenly venerables present had ugly expressions on their faces. Those who were able to follow the middle heavenly venerables, west heavenly venerables, and south heavenly venerables were either experts nurtured by the Fortune Divine Dynasty or local forces that were close to the Fortune Divine Dynasty. They did not have much independent tendencies. It could be said that they were not the same as the heavenly Tao sects group. Now that they suddenly heard this matter, many people felt sullen. We are fighting to the death for the martial epoch at the front line, fighting with all our might. Those foreign sovereign clans actually dared to stab us in the back at this time. We absolutely cannot let them go. We should completely annihilate them. They are the cancer of the entire martial epoch. At this time, a burly heavenly master said angrily. He had just received news that his large sects in the northern domain had suffered heavy losses under the attack of the foreign allied army. They could only rely on the backup he had left behind to barely hold on. There was simply no way for them to resist. He hadn't expected that the Outer Realm Coalition army would be so determined this time. The four sides had mobilized at the same time. How much energy would be needed to accomplish this? With their understanding of the Outer Realm, they simply didn't dare to imagine it. Almost immediately, he instinctively felt that there was a giant dark hand behind him controlling all of this, and this giant hand's purpose was to destroy the entire Fortune God dynasty. Also, people like the Heavenly Tao sect, who are wise enough to protect themselves, should also be annihilated. They were unwilling to come to the epic battlefield. They can't even defend their own territory. Such a large sect is simply a cancer. They should absorb the Fortune God dynasty's strength to strengthen themselves. The sooner we eradicate them, the better. The burly, heavenly venerable said angrily. Many heavenly masters nodded in agreement. Regardless of whether they had suffered heavy losses in this catastrophe or not, the Fortune God dynasty's heavenly masters had always been very annoyed with these semi-independent civilian forces. However, if they wanted to annihilate a colossus like the Heavenly Tao sect, they would inevitably have to pay a heavy price, which was tantamount to the foreign sovereign clans and the ancient epic benefiting. But now, with this incident, everyone's anger had completely erupted, and their anger had reached its peak. Chapter 3564. There was a reason why the heavenly venerables were so furious. They had already been tricked by the people of the Devil Path era at the front line, and this had already made them furious. They hadn't even been able to vent their resentment, and now they had encountered such a situation. It was as if they had been stabbed in the back. Besides the veteran heavenly venerables like the Heavenly Tao sect master, who were playing it safe, there were also the former heavenly venerables who had been rescued by Yi Shiwen from the path of creation. Seeing this situation, it seemed like not many people had come forward to resist. Yi Shiwen thought of many things in this regard. In the face of the foreign allied forces, these old antiques were also playing it safe. As for the fact that they had been imprisoned on the path of creation for countless years and their strength had been greatly reduced, this should be true. However, did they really not have the strength to resist at all? They were probably just watching a good show. Yi Shiwen could also guess why they were watching a good show. He was afraid that it was related to the competition for resources. The cultivation and growth of a heavenly venerate had never been a matter of one person. There was often a huge tribe or a powerful sect behind them. However, it was unknown how many years these old fellows had been imprisoned. The tribes and sects that they belonged to had either been destroyed in the long river of time or had weakened to a certain extent. The really good territories and countless resources had been occupied by the rising stars. Although these old fellows had returned, they were faced with the embarrassment of not having a territory. Although the creation realm was huge, it was too small for these heavenly venerables. If they wanted to divide up the territory, they would definitely have to clash with the current heavenly venerables. However, although these current heavenly venerables were mostly juniors, they weren't to be trifled with. The general trend had already been formed, and they would suffer if they rashly interfered. In addition, they had been imprisoned for many years, and their vitality had been greatly damaged. They simply couldn't resist. In such a situation, these antiques probably had some ideas in their hearts. They could use this invasion to eliminate a large number of races and sects that they couldn't personally deal with. When the time came, they would be able to drive out the allied forces from the outer realms, and the remaining territories would become places that they could occupy. These Empyreans were all high and lofty existences. They had experienced 10,000 tribulations and hadn't perished. Ordinary matters wouldn't be able to move them, but now that it concerned their foundation, not a single one of them was willing to back down. The providence and resources of the tribes and sects could also be used to supplement the heavenly venerables, allowing their cultivation to reach a higher level and become even stronger. Thinking of this, Yi Shiwen couldn't help but feel a little worried in his heart. The current Fortune God dynasty could be said to be suffering from both external and internal troubles. Outside, there was the covetous eyes of the ancient era. Inside, there were the rebellious tyrants of the Fortune God dynasty. Moreover, there were some veteran heavenly venerables who covetously wanted to provoke the flames of war and snatch territories. Then, the foreign allied forces suddenly attacked, and there was a hand behind them. There was probably a hidden hand pushing them from the shadows. God, there were internal and heavenly venerables that wanted to for the situation. God dynasty's heavenly God. However, he was more concerned about how he could obtain enough benefits for the human race and himself, especially since he wanted to fight for the Eastern heavenly venerate position. If he succeeded, he would have to face such a messy situation. What should he do under the circumstances? It's a complete mess. All right, if we want to deal with those guys, we have to wait until the foreign invaders are driven out. The middle heavenly venerables glanced at everyone and said, "That's the most important thing now. Yes, let's drive those guys out first." Many heavenly venerables echoed. What I'm worried about now is whether this is a conspiracy. From the time the demon era detonated the array to the time the foreign invaders invaded, there was such a short period of time. It's hard to believe that this is a coincidence. The middle heavenly venerables said, "I'm worried that this is actually a trap. If we take the good fortune universe map away, what if the demon era makes a comeback with the heaven-splitting devil axe?" Hearing the middle Empyreans say this, many Empyreans fell silent. This wasn't impossible. The outer realms had launched an attack so coincidentally. It was absolutely impossible to say that it didn't have the slightest connection to the ancient era. Although these ancient eras were also life and death enemies for the foreign invaders, there was no guarantee that there would be some cooperation between them. Many of the heavenly venerables present had many friends and collaborators in the ancient era. Therefore, they couldn't be more certain that this was a very likely thing. If this was really the case, then the entire situation would be terrible to a considerable extent. If this was the case, then everything they had done now would become bubbles. They would rejoice in vain. I think everyone's concerns are reasonable, but there is no need to be so worried, Yishuin said, while everyone was silent. I think there is a problem that everyone has clearly forgotten. This time, how many ancient eras have been tricked by the demonic path era? Next time, if they want to gather such an army, I'm afraid it will be impossible. With their strength alone, even if they occupy Moon City again, it will be like throwing an egg against a rock. Hearing Yi Shiwen's analysis, everyone felt a sudden realization. Indeed, they had been suppressed by the coalition army organized by the Demon Era. But it was different now. The Demon Era and those ancient eras had been deceived. It was impossible to gain the trust of the other ancient eras. Considering the losses of those ancient eras, it was already very good that they did not fly into a rage and settle accounts with the Demon Era. According to the Demon Era's best estimate, if they could annihilate the armies of the Fortune God Dynasty and the ancient eras, even if they had to suffer the hostility of countless eras, it would still be worth it. At that time, the gap between the Demon Era and the Fortune God Dynasty would be greatly reduced. After the Fortune God Dynasty's strength was greatly weakened, they would no longer have the strength to suppress the opposing forces inside and outside the Fortune God Dynasty. The entire Fortune world would usher in a chaotic era. At that time, it would be the best opportunity for the ancient eras. Under such circumstances, no matter how much hatred those ancient eras had for the Demon Era, they would unite in the face of great benefits and the possibility of conquering the Fortune God Dynasty. It could be said that the Demon Era had indeed calculated many things. If they could complete their plan, the entire Demon Era's forces would usher in a huge leap. However, the appearance of Yi Shiwen had completely ruined their plans. The Fortune God Dynasty's allied forces had retained most of their strength, and not all of them had been annihilated. Even though their vitality had been severely damaged, they still had enough strength to maintain the situation of the entire Fortune God Dynasty. The Demon Era's miscalculation was the Fortune God Dynasty's greatest advantage. Although the Fortune God Dynasty's vitality was greatly damaged after the two Moon City battles, they still had the strength to protect themselves. Honorable Wu said it well. Middle Heavenly Venerate clapped his hands and laughed. He felt that the dark clouds in his heart had been dispelled by Yi Shiwen's words. It wasn't that they didn't think of this, but they were blinded by the situation. In a moment of anxiety, they didn't know what they should have known. In the face of Yi Shiwen's eloquence, Space-Time Heavenly Venerate and Southern Heavenly Venerate wore complicated expressions. During this time, the entire Allied forces were filled with the mood of failure. Even if these people were outstanding cultivators with strong minds, it was inevitable that they would feel defeated after encountering such a setback. However, in this bleak environment, Not only did Yi Shiwen not follow the crowd, but he was able to stand out and become the savior in countless people's hearts. In this battle for the Eastern Heavenly Venerate, Yi Shiwen had already gained the upper hand. Even they couldn't do anything about it. In addition, even if the demon era makes a comeback, what can they do? Yi Shiwen said in a loud and impassioned voice, "In my opinion, this isn't a problem at all. Instead, it's an opportunity for us to avenge our humiliation. Previously, they were able to resist us for such a long time because of Moon City. Now that Moon City has been destroyed, even though the continent still exists, it's no longer the same as before. If they want to occupy such a place, they won't be able to do so without a steady stream of support. Instead, they will be surrounded and annihilated by us. As long as the other divine cities send their armies to cut off their retreat, we can dispatch troops from the Fortune God dynasty to form a situation where we can catch them like a turtle in a jar and wipe them out in one fell swoop." The more the Middle Heavenly Venerate looked at Yi Shiwen, the more satisfied he became. After hearing Yi Shiwen's words, his original worry had become the Fortune Divine Dynasty's advantage. It was fine if the Devil Path Era's army didn't come, but if they did, then they would be able to catch a turtle in a jar and beat the dog inside. At that time, the Devil Path Era's army would be dead for sure. At that time, not only would the Demon Era's army not be able to escape, but they would also die a tragic death, giving the Demon Era a taste of suffering. Ever since they knew about the Demon Era, there had been victories and defeats in their confrontations. However, other than the era of the Fortune Heavenly Monarch, the current Fortune God dynasty had never dealt a heavy blow to the Demon Era. That's right. It's fine if the Demon Era doesn't come, but if they do, then let them die. Ha ha, I can't wait for them to come back. Then let's catch them all in one fell swoop. Wu Zun is right. We were too nervous before. With our Fortune God dynasty strength, crushing them is too easy. Chapter 3565. All the celestial masters began to talk at once. Unknowingly, Yi Shiwen had become the core of everyone and the leader of opinions. Although he was still a rising star and had only been cultivating for more than 10,000 years, this was nothing in the eyes of many people. If it was only Yi Shiwen's cultivation speed and strength, it would not be like this. However, Yi Shiwen could always make earth-shattering moves. First, he destroyed the 7th Gold Era with the Middle Heavenly Master, making the Fortune God dynasty more powerful. They also benefited a lot. Furthermore, the discovery of this great formation allowed them to escape a calamity and not be completely annihilated. It could be said that even though he had only achieved Tao for a short period of time, many people owed him favors, and there were many who owed him their lives. In a situation where everyone was extremely pessimistic, only he could think of situations that no one else could think of. All of this made everyone seem to have begun to get used to his existence and to accepting his opinions. This change was extremely beneficial for Yi Shiwen because it could greatly make up for his lack of qualifications. However, it was not a good thing for other competitors who wanted to compete for the position of Eastern Heavenly Master. Originally, Yi Shiwen could only be regarded as the bottom of many competitors. Whether it was qualifications, strength, or contributions, Yi Shiwen was at the bottom. However, in just a short time, Yi Shiwen had completely reversed this situation and made immortal contributions. No one knew how many people he had saved. His strength had also increased rapidly. The fact that he could escape from the hands of the city lord of Luna City was proof of this. He had even killed rebels like Supreme Copper and Supreme Bone. In terms of strength, he could be considered to be at the top level. From all aspects, Yi Shiwen had completely fulfilled the basic conditions to become an Eastern Heavenly Lord, apart from the fact that he seemed to be very important, but in fact, his qualifications were just SOSO. This was exactly what Yi Shiwen wanted to do. How many times had he risked his life in exchange for the current situation? Compared to others, the Middle Heavenly Master was very satisfied. After all, he was the one who recommended Yi Shiwen. No matter who became the next Eastern Heavenly Master, it would be beneficial for him. Originally, he was more optimistic about Silver Venerable, but now it seemed that the possibility of Yi Shiwen succeeding seemed to be higher. Everyone should have heard martial honor's words just now. The middle heavenly master looked around at everyone. Because of Yi Shiwen's words, everyone's hearts had been relieved. They no longer had to worry about being attacked from both sides. If the demonic epic wanted to cause trouble, then the one who would suffer a pincer attack at any moment would be none other than the demonic epic. Everyone, don't worry. However, we can't just give up on Moon City. We can't just ignore it. I'll give the order. Space-Time Empyrean, lead a group of people to guard Moon City and work with Sun City to defend the epic battlefield. Nothing must go wrong, Middle Empyrean said. He was still worried and left a group of people in Moon City. Everyone else, return to the Fortune World. We'll work together to drive out those invaders. Get them out. I've had enough of them. Kill them. Kill. I'll teach them a lesson. If I don't kill them this time, I'll write my name backwards. Many people clamored. Obviously, they had been holding in for a long time and wanted to kill their way back. Following the Middle Heavenly Master's order, the entire Fortune God Dynasty's allied army camp began to move. Countless troops were mobilized and prepared to return to the Fortune God Dynasty to quell the foreign rebellions and invasions. The entire military camp was bustling with activity. Yi Shiwen hovered in the sky above the military camp, watching the troops being mobilized one after another. They were sent to the Rising Sun City through the teleportation array and finally returned to the Fortune God Dynasty. He looked in the direction of the Fortune God Dynasty. It was as if he could see through the layers of chaos and see the human race in the Fortune God Dynasty. According to the intelligence he had obtained, the eastern region had also fallen into the flames of war. With most of the elites being transferred away, the eastern region had no ability to resist the iron hooves of the foreign allied forces and was repeatedly breached. Now, with a slight estimation, he was afraid that the enemy was about to reach the city. He was a little worried, but he didn't despair because he still had an absolute trump card in Mount Buzhou. It should be enough to hold on for some time. After waiting for a while, he made a decision. He called Bian Xiaoyi over and put her in charge of leading the army back to the Fortune God Dynasty. He himself stepped into the transmission array and disappeared from the Fortune God Dynasty's camp. At this time, when the news of the Fortune World's changes spread to the battlefield, the human race's conference was in full swing. Although many forces were in a wait-and-see state, there were still many big clans and sects that were directly facing the threat of the foreign allied army who had sent their important figures to the conference. There were even some who sent their sect masters and patriarchs personally to resist the foreign allied army's increasingly terrifying vanguard, blocking them outside and protecting themselves. For a time, the entire Mount Buzhou was bustling with noise and excitement. Purple clouds could be seen everywhere. The arrival of the Emperor-Emperors was an unprecedented grand occasion in this extremely dangerous situation. Due to the fact that they were facing the attack of the foreign allied forces at any time, time was tight, so they did not arrange any complicated procedures. They directly arranged all the emperors to the largest venue on Buzhou Mountain. When all the emperors arrived, purple chi spread everywhere, and it was a scene of auspiciousness. If these sovereign emperors descended here, even if they did not do anything, this place would become an absolute blessed land. Cultivating here would be like receiving the heavenly Tao's favor, allowing one to advance at a tremendous pace. Even a pig would become an absolute genius here. This was the function of these extreme Tao masters. They could change the heavenly Tao and the heavenly Tao, turning a barren desert into a cultivation holy land that could promote cultivation. Soon, the conference began. All the emperor-emperors took their seats, facing the great enemy. They didn't even have the mood to eat or drink. Even if there was delicious food placed in front of them, it was difficult to move them. On the host seat, Fengyi looked around and saw the emperor-emperors sitting in 2 rows on his left and right. Usually, with his ability to summon, it was impossible for so many emperor-emperors to respond to his call. But now, under the pressure of the foreign allied army, they had no choice but to gather here. Everyone, because the situation at the front line is urgent, the foreign allied army may approach at any time, so I won't say too much nonsense. Long story short, I think everyone should be very clear about the purpose of gathering everyone here today. It is to organize the allied army, to fight against the foreign allied army. Only when we are united can we fight against the foreign allied army. We won't be like a plate of loose sand that will be defeated by them one by one. Fengyi said, "Now let me ask, does anyone have any objections to forming this alliance? Does anyone have any objections to the human race and the 11 states leading this alliance?" All the emperors shook their heads. Since they came here, it meant that they had agreed to this. Those who didn't agree, naturally, wouldn't come here. There was no objection to this. Raising an objection at this moment would only make them the target of everyone. Now, everyone was hoping that someone could take the lead and lead the human race to fight against the foreign allied army. Nothing could be better than the fact that the human race was willing to stand out. Looking around and seeing that no one had any objections, Fengyi continued, "All right, since no one has any objections, then I will announce that our alliance to fight against the foreign allied army is officially formed. Our human race will be the leader. Of course, I am not qualified to be the leader of this alliance. Since Wu Zun is not here, the position of leader will be reserved for him. I will be the vice leader, along with a few people selected from among you." Everyone listened to Fengyi's words quietly. Up until now, there hadn't been anything that they couldn't accept. The leader of the human race, the pillar of the human race, Wu Zun becoming the alliance leader was a matter of course. It was also normal for Fengyi to appoint a deputy alliance leader, and the other positions will be taken by the strongest among them. Also, there are some rules and regulations, including the number of troops each family needs, when they will arrive, and so on. All of these need to be discussed in advance, but I hope that no one will violate the rules. Otherwise, you will be the enemy of the alliance, the Fortune Divine dynasty, and there will be no place for you in this world." Fengyi said coldly. As the saying goes, peaceful measures before resorting to force. Some ugly words have to be said in advance, lest everyone makes a mistake. Suddenly, just as Fengyi was about to continue speaking, the entire hall shook violently, as if the sky was falling and the earth was cracking. Everyone's expressions changed because they knew very well what the reason for the tremors was. Enemies were attacking. Everyone, don't panic. There's an enchantment left behind by Wu Zun on Mount Buzhou. Even a heavenly venerable can't break the enchantment so quickly. Let's go and have a look. Fengyi said calmly while the others were talking about him. Hearing Fengyi's words, the other Emperor Realm sovereigns calmed down. They were all outstanding cultivators. They were just a little panicked because they were frightened, but they soon calmed down. Fengyi took a big stride forward and flew up to the sky above Buzhou Mountain. The other imperial emperors followed suit. What they saw was not an army from the outer domain, as they had expected. Instead, there was only one man. You're tuning into the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.